The kitchen was burning, and Rose Campbell was running back inside. Flames licked up the wooden walls of High Ridge Ranch's cookhouse as 25 cowboys screamed at her to stop. But she didn't care. Her mother's cookbook was in there, the only thing she had left of her old life. She'd survived starvation, shame, and a Montana blizzard to get here. She wasn't about to lose the one piece of her past worth keeping. This is the story of how a desperate woman became the heart of the wildest ranch in Montana. Before I begin, I invite you to stay with me until the very end of this journey, and please comment below with your city so I can see how far Rose's story has traveled across the world. The blizzard hit High Ridge Ranch like God's own fury on that January evening in 1875. Rose Campbell felt it first as a whisper of ice against her cheek, then as a roar that swallowed the world whole. Wind tore at her threadbare coat, the same one she'd been wearing for 3 winters now, with its missing buttons and frayed hem that dragged in the snow. Her boots, more whole than leather, filled with freezing slush with every step. She'd wrapped her feet in newspaper that morning, but the Montana cold didn't care about her makeshift solutions. She could barely see 10 feet ahead. The world had become nothing but white and wind and the desperate hope that she was still walking in the right direction. Please, she prayed to whatever might be listening, please let the ranch be close. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. She clutched the collar of her coat with hands that no longer felt like her own, keeping it closed against the wind that wanted to rip it away. Her dark hair, once pinned carefully beneath her worn hat, now whipped wildly around her face, stinging her eyes with frozen strands. Rose had been walking for 6 hours. 6 hours since the stagecoach driver had dropped her at the crossroads with a grunt and a pointed finger. High Ridge Ranch is that way, ma'am. About 5 miles if the weather holds. The weather hadn't held. It had broken apart like a promise made by a desperate man, quick and complete. But Rose Campbell was no stranger to broken promises. Her husband had made plenty before he died, and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation she'd never asked for. The town of Billings had made promises too, that a widow could find honest work, that people would look past where she'd been forced to work to survive, that mercy existed for women who'd had no choice. All lies. So when she'd heard about a cook's position at High Ridge Ranch, heard it third hand from a woman at the boarding house who'd heard it from a supply merchant who'd heard it from one of the ranch hands, Rose had sold her last dress, bought a stagecoach ticket, and left Billings without looking back. She would not starve. She would not beg. She would not return to the Rosebell Saloon no matter how many times the owner sent word that her old room was waiting. She would rather freeze to death in a Montana blizzard. The thought almost made her laugh, except her face was too frozen for that particular luxury. Through the curtain of snow, something dark emerged. A shape. No, shapes. Plural. Buildings, maybe? Rose's heart lurched with hope so sharp it hurt worse than the cold. She stumbled forward, her legs barely obeying her commands anymore. Her knees had been threatening to give out for the last mile, but she'd forced them to keep working through sheer stubborn will. Just a little further. The shape solidified as she drew closer. A massive barn, dark wood barely visible through the snow. A long, low bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, blessed smoke that meant warmth and life. And there, set back from the other buildings, a large ranch house with light glowing in its windows, like heaven's own beacon. Rose had found High Ridge Ranch. She nearly collapsed right there, relief flooding through her so powerfully that her vision blurred. But she forced herself to keep moving, to keep putting one foot in front of the other. The ranch had a wide front gate, and she could see figures moving in the yard despite the storm, cowboys rushing to secure animals and equipment before the blizzard's full force hit. She reached the gate and grabbed it with both hands, more to keep herself upright than to open it. The metal was so cold it burned, but she held on anyway. "Hello," she called out, but her voice was barely a whisper, stolen by the wind. She tried again, louder this time. "Hello, I'm here about the cook's position." A cowboy rushed past, barely glancing at her. Then another. A third one actually stopped, peering at her through the snow with narrowed eyes beneath his hat brim. "You lost, lady," he shouted over the wind. "I'm here about the job," Rose called back. "The cook's job." The man's eyes widened. Then he turned and shouted toward the bunkhouse. "Hey, we got a woman at the gate." Within seconds, several men had gathered, all staring at her like she was a ghost materialized from the storm. Rose held her ground, even though her legs were shaking so badly she wasn't sure how much longer she could stand. One of the men, older than the others with a graying beard, stepped forward. "Ma'am, there ain't no cook's position here, never has been." Rose's heart plummeted. "But I heard—" "You heard wrong," another man interrupted. "Boss don't hire women, never has, never will. You best head back to wherever you came from." "I came from Billings," Rose said, her voice stronger now despite her exhaustion. "I walked 6 hours in this storm because I was told there was work here." "Then you were told a lie." The older man almost looked sorry. "We do our own cooking, don't need no—" "Your bunkhouse smells like burned beans from here," Rose interrupted, straightening her spine. "And I'd wager money you've been eating nothing but hardtack and jerky for weeks. I can cook for 25 men without breaking a sweat, and I'll do it better than any cowhand trying to work a stove between riding fence lines." The men exchanged glances. One of them, younger than the others, almost smiled. "Lady's got spirit," he muttered. "Lady's got frostbite is what she's got," the older man said. He studied Rose for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, I can't offer you no job, but I ain't about to let you freeze to death on our doorstep neither. Come on inside, warm up, and when the storm passes, we'll get you back to town." It wasn't what Rose wanted, but it was something. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice cracking. The man opened the gate and gestured for her to follow. The walk to the bunkhouse felt like miles, even though it was only yards. Rose's legs barely worked anymore, and she stumbled twice before she felt a hand grip her elbow, steadying her. She looked up into the face of the younger cowboy who'd said she had spirit. He couldn't have been more than 25, with winter blue eyes and a day's worth of stubble on his strong jaw. "Easy now," he said quietly. "I got you." There was something in his voice, a gentleness that didn't match his rough appearance, that made Rose's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She nodded, letting him guide her toward the warm light spilling from the bunkhouse door. Inside, the heat hit her like a physical force. The room was long and narrow, lined with bunks on both sides. A potbelly stove sat in the center, radiating blessed warmth. Several cowboys were already inside, and they all turned to stare as Rose entered. "Jimmy found a lost woman," the older man announced. "She'll warm up here till the storm passes." Rose stood just inside the door, very aware of the water pooling beneath her ruined boots, of how she must look with her hair wild and her face probably red from the cold. But she lifted her chin and met their stares with her own. "Rose Campbell," she said clearly, "and I'm not lost. I came here on purpose." "Well, your purpose is misguided, ma'am," one of the cowboys drawled from his bunk. "This ain't no place for a lady." "Good thing I'm not a lady then," Rose shot back. "I'm a cook, and from the smell of this place, you need one desperately." A few of the men chuckled at that. The young man who'd helped her, Jimmy, apparently, guided her to a chair near the stove. "Sit," he ordered gently. "Get warm. You want coffee?" Rose wanted to refuse, to maintain her pride, but she was so cold and tired that pride felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Yes, please." Jimmy moved to the stove where a battered coffee pot sat, and Rose noticed the way he moved, economical, efficient, like someone who'd grown up doing physical labor. He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her, and when their fingers brushed during the exchange, Rose felt the calluses on his hands. Working man's hands, honest hands. She wrapped her frozen fingers around the cup, savoring the warmth, and took a careful sip. The coffee was terrible, bitter and overboiled, but it was hot, and right now that was all that mattered. "So what's this about a cook's job?" Jimmy asked, crouching beside her chair. Up close, Rose could see that his eyes weren't just blue. They had flecks of gray in them, like a winter sky just before snow. "I heard in Billings that High Ridge Ranch was looking for a cook," Rose explained. "A woman at the boarding house said her brother's friend works here, and you needed someone who could handle feeding the whole crew." Jimmy's brow furrowed. "Who told you that?" "Martha Henley. Said her brother was Joe Henley?" Recognition flashed across Jimmy's face. "Joe left 2 months ago, headed to California." He stood up, rubbing his jaw. "I think I know what happened. Joe used to complain about the food all the time. Probably told his sister we needed a cook, and she heard we're hiring a cook." So there's no job. Rose's voice came out flatter than she intended. I didn't say that. Everyone turned to look at Jimmy in surprise, including Rose. What are you talking about? The older man demanded. Jimmy looked at Rose, then at the assembled cowboys. Look around, Hank. Really look. When's the last time anyone here ate something that wasn't burned, underseasoned, or hard enough to break teeth? We've been taking turns cooking, and every one of us is terrible at it. That don't mean— Let her prove it, Jimmy interrupted. She claims she can cook for 25 men? Let her cook tonight's supper. If it's good, we keep her. If it ain't, we send her back to Billings when the storm clears. Hank looked skeptical. The boss won't like it. The boss ain't here, Jimmy said. He went to Helena, won't be back for 3 days. By then, the men will have tasted her cooking. If it's good as she says, they'll fight him on sending her away. Rose's heart started to beat faster. This was a chance, a real chance. And if I can't cook as well as I claim? She asked. Jimmy's lips quirked in a small smile. Then I guess you'll have wasted our flour and our time. But something tells me you didn't walk 6 hours in a blizzard on a lie. He was right about that. Rose had never been a liar. Even when lying would have made her life easier, she'd stuck to the truth. It was one of the few things she had left that was truly hers. I'll do it, she said, setting down her coffee cup and starting to rise. Her legs wobbled, but she locked her knees and stayed upright. Where's the kitchen? Whoa, hold on. Jimmy put a hand on her shoulder, gently pushing her back into the chair. You need to warm up first. Get some feeling back in those fingers and toes. Kitchen ain't going anywhere. How much time do I have before you expect supper? Hank checked his pocket watch. Usually eat around 6. It's 4:30 now. Rose nodded. An hour and a half. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. I'll need to see what supplies you have. I'll show you, Jimmy offered. But first you sit here and finish that coffee. Doctor's orders. You a doctor? Rose asked with a raised eyebrow. No, ma'am. Just a cowhand with common sense. He grinned, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Rose's stomach flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. She looked away, focusing on her coffee. She couldn't afford distractions, not when she finally had a chance to prove herself. The other cowboys went back to their business, some playing cards, others mending tack or reading worn newspapers. But Rose felt their glances, their curiosity. Some looked skeptical, others amused. A few looked downright hostile, as if her mere presence was an insult. She was used to that. The Rosebell Saloon had taught her to read men's expressions, to know who was dangerous and who was just posturing. These cowboys were the posturing type mostly. All bark, no bite. Well, except maybe one. There was a man sitting on a bunk in the far corner, silent and watching. He hadn't said a word since Rose entered, but his eyes never left her. Not in the way men usually looked at her, not with desire or disgust, but with calculation, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. Rose met his stare evenly until he looked away first. Don't mind Carson, Jimmy said quietly, noticing the exchange. He don't trust easy. Neither do I, Rose replied. Jimmy studied her face for a moment, and Rose had the uncomfortable sensation that he was seeing more than she wanted to show. No, he said slowly. I don't imagine you do. They sat in silence while Rose finished her coffee. Gradually, feeling returned to her fingers and toes, accompanied by painful pins and needles that made her grit her teeth. Her face thawed too, and she became aware of just how windburned and raw her skin felt. She must look a fright. Not that it mattered. She hadn't come here to be admired. She'd come here to work. All right, she said, setting down the empty cup and standing. This time her legs held steady. Show me the kitchen. Jimmy grabbed a lantern and led her out a side door that connected the bunkhouse to a smaller building Rose hadn't noticed in the storm. The wind hit them immediately, snow driving sideways with enough force to sting exposed skin. Kitchen's separate, Jimmy shouted over the wind. Fire hazard otherwise. Rose nodded, understanding. Ranch buildings were always vulnerable to fire, especially the ones with cook stoves. Better to have the kitchen separate so if it went up in flames, it wouldn't take everything else with it. The kitchen door was stuck, swollen from moisture, and Jimmy had to put his shoulder into it before it opened with a groan. He held the lantern high as they stepped inside. and Rose got her first look at her temporary workplace. It was worse than she'd imagined. The room was small, maybe 15 feet square, with a large cast iron stove dominating one wall. Pots and pans hung from hooks, most of them crusted with old food. The wooden counter was stained and scarred, and the floor looked like it hadn't been swept in weeks. Flour dusted every surface, and in the corner, Rose could see the telltale droppings of mice. But beneath the filth and neglect, Rose could see potential. Good bones, her mother would have said. The stove was quality, a big Acme range that could handle serious cooking. There was a decent-sized pantry, and through another door she glimpsed what looked like a cold storage room. "I know it's rough," Jimmy said apologetically. "We've been meaning to clean it up, but you've been too busy actually running a ranch," Rose finished. She rolled up her sleeves. "It's fine. I've worked in worse." That was true, though she didn't elaborate. The kitchen at the Rosebell hadn't been much better, and at least this one didn't reek of stale beer and cheaper perfume. "Show me the pantry," she directed. Jimmy led her to the pantry, and Rose's hopes rose slightly. It was well stocked: flour, sugar, salt, lard, dried beans, rice, potatoes, onions, carrots. There was a whole shelf of canned goods, another of dried herbs and spices. Whoever did the ordering knew what they were doing, even if no one knew how to use it properly. In the cold storage room, she found a massive haunch of beef, several slabs of bacon, and a basket of eggs. Not fresh, but still good. Rose's mind started working, calculating quantities and timing. Beef stew was the obvious choice, hearty, filling, and she could make enough to feed an army in the time she had. But stew was ordinary. If she wanted to convince these men she was worth keeping, she needed to give them something they weren't expecting. "How many men exactly?" she asked. 22 in the bunkhouse, plus Hank, who's foreman, plus me, plus old Cookie, who's too arthritic to work, but we keep him on anyway," Jimmy counted. "So 25 total." "Cookie, you have a cook?" "Had. He can't work the stove no more. Hands shake too bad. But he's got nowhere else to go, so the boss lets him stay. He's probably in his room right now." Rose nodded slowly. 25 men, 90 minutes, and a kitchen that would need a miracle and a match. "I'll need help cleaning," she said. "Just the basic surfaces and the stove. Can you spare someone?" "I'll do it," Jimmy offered immediately. Rose looked at him in surprise. "You're not worried about what the other men will think? Helping a woman with kitchen work?" Jimmy shrugged. "I'm worried about eating something that ain't burned for once. That worry's bigger than my pride." Despite everything, Rose felt a smile tug at her lips. "Fair enough. There's a broom in the corner. Start sweeping while I get the stove going." They worked in companionable silence. Rose built up the fire in the stove while Jimmy swept the floor and wiped down the counters. The kitchen slowly transformed from disaster to merely well-used. It wouldn't pass a white glove inspection, but it would do. Rose pulled out the beef haunch and studied it critically. A good 30 pounds, maybe more. She could make a roast, but that would take too long. Stew was still the smart choice, but she could elevate it. She grabbed a large pot and set it on the stove, adding lard to heat. While it melted, she cut the beef into chunks, working quickly with the sharp knife she found buried in a drawer. Her hands remembered the rhythm: cut, turn, cut again. She'd learned to butcher meat at her mother's side, back when life was simple and the future looked bright, back before everything fell apart. "You really know what you're doing," Jimmy observed, leaning against the counter to watch. "My mother was a cook," Rose said without looking up. "She taught me everything, said a woman who could cook would never starve, never be without options." "She sounds wise." She was. Rose's knife moved faster. She was wrong about the never starving part, though. Jimmy was quiet for a moment. "When'd you lose her?" 5 years ago. Fever took her." Rose scooped the cut beef into the hot pot, where it sizzled and began to brown. "Same fever that took my father and my baby brother. I was 17. "I'm sorry." Rose shrugged, stirring the meat. "Life's hard. You survive or you don't." She added onions and carrots to the pot, filling the kitchen with their sweet aroma as they softened. Then flour to thicken, stirring constantly to prevent lumps. The movements were automatic, muscle memory from thousands of meals prepared. "So what happened after?" Jimmy asked. "After you lost them?" Rose debated whether to answer, but something about the honest curiosity in his voice, The lack of judgment made her decide to tell part of the truth. "I got married," she said. "Thomas Campbell. He seemed like a good man. Turned out he was better at seeming than being." He hurt you?" "He neglected me," Rose corrected, adding water to the pot and adjusting the heat. "Drank more than he worked, made promises he never kept. When he died, he left me with nothing but debts and a reputation in tatters." She didn't mention how Thomas had died, didn't mention finding him in their bed with another woman, or the fight that followed, or how he'd stormed out drunk and angry and walked in front of a supply wagon. The whole town had blamed her, of course. The widow who'd driven her husband to drink, to infidelity, to death. Never mind that Thomas had been drinking and cheating long before Rose married him. Never mind that she'd tried to make it work, tried to be a good wife to a bad man. The town needed someone to blame, and a widow was an easy target. "So you came here," Jimmy said. "So I came here," Rose agreed. She moved to the pantry and grabbed potatoes, dumping them into a bucket. "Looking for honest work and a fresh start." "Think you'll find it?" Rose looked at him squarely. "That depends on whether you boys can handle having a woman around who won't take your nonsense." Jimmy laughed at that, a genuine sound that warmed something in Rose's chest she'd thought had frozen solid. "Something tells me you'll manage just fine," he said. They worked together for the next hour. Jimmy peeled potatoes under Rose's direction while she prepared biscuits. Real biscuits with buttermilk and butter, not the hard rocks she suspected these men were used to. She made gravy from the beef drippings, seasoned the stew with herbs she found in the pantry, and even managed to throw together a simple apple cobbler from dried apples and brown sugar. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like heaven. Rose stood back and surveyed her work. The stew bubbled on the stove, rich and fragrant. The biscuits were golden brown and perfect. The cobbler cooled on the counter, steam still rising from its sugared top. It was good. She knew it was good. Now she just had to hope it was good enough. "I'll go tell the men," Jimmy said, but he paused at the door. "Rose?" She turned to look at him. "You got this," he said simply. "Whatever happens, you gave it your best shot. That's all anyone can ask." Rose nodded, not trusting herself to speak. There was something about this young cowboy's kindness that threatened to crack the armor she'd built around her heart. Jimmy left, and Rose was alone in the kitchen. She could hear the wind still howling outside, the blizzard showing no signs of stopping. She was trapped here, at least for tonight. Trapped with 25 men and one chance to prove she was worth keeping. She heard them coming before she saw them, boots stomping, voices calling out. The door burst open and cowboys filed in, shaking snow from their hats and coats. They crowded around the long table someone must have dragged in from somewhere, jostling for seats. Rose stood by the stove, ladle in hand, and waited. Hank was first in line. He held out his bowl without a word, and Rose filled it generously. He took one look at the stew, inhaled deeply, and his eyebrows rose. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. The second man got his bowl, then the third. Rose worked steadily, filling bowls and handing out biscuits. The room grew quiet except for the sound of spoons scraping bowls and men eating. Rose watched them nervously. They ate quickly, hungrily, but their faces gave nothing away. Cowboys were good at hiding their feelings. She was learning. Then Hank stood up and walked back to the stove. "Seconds?" Rose asked. "Thirds," he corrected, holding out his bowl. "And ma'am, I ain't had food this good since my mama died 20 years ago." The tension in Rose's shoulders released all at once. Other men started calling out for seconds, thirds. The biscuits disappeared in minutes. Someone found the cobbler and shouted in delight. Jimmy appeared at her elbow, grinning. "Told you," he said quietly. By the time the last man had eaten his fill, Rose was exhausted but triumphant. The men lingered at the table, talking and laughing in a way that spoke of contentment and full bellies. "All right, boys," Hank called out. "Show of hands. Who wants to keep Miss Campbell as our cook?" Every hand in the room went up, even Carson's, though his face remained impassive. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. "Motion carries," Hank declared. "Miss Campbell, you're hired. We'll deal with the boss when he gets back, but far as I'm concerned, you just earned yourself a place at High Ridge Ranch." The men cheered, and Rose managed a small smile. But even as relief flooded through her, she couldn't help wondering what would happen when the boss returned. Would he honor the men's decision, or would he send her away regardless? "Where am I sleeping?" she asked Hank. He scratched his beard. "Well, that's a problem. Bunkhouse ain't appropriate for a lady, and the main house is locked up tight while the boss is gone." "There's a cot in the pantry," Rose said. "I saw it. I'll sleep there." "That ain't hardly— It's warm, it's dry, and it's private," Rose interrupted. "I've slept in worse places. It'll do." Hank looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "All right, but when the boss gets back, we'll figure something better." Rose didn't argue. She was too tired to argue. She helped the men clean up. They insisted on helping, unused to having someone cook for them, and then retreated to the pantry. The cot was narrow and the blanket thin, but Rose didn't care. She lay down fully clothed except for her ruined boots, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Outside, the blizzard raged on. But inside the pantry, Rose was warm and safe for the first time in months. She'd found a place, at least for now. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought she heard the kitchen door open and close, heard quiet footsteps. Then she felt the weight of another blanket being laid over her, tucking her in gently. "Sleep well, Rose Campbell," Jimmy's voice whispered. "You earned it." Rose smiled in the darkness, but didn't open her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, High Ridge Ranch would be the fresh start she'd been looking for. Maybe here, finally, she could stop running. Rose woke to the sound of men's voices and the smell of coffee she hadn't made. For a moment, disoriented in the darkness of the pantry, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The blizzard, the ranch, the meal that had earned her a place here. She sat up quickly, the two blankets falling away, and realized pale morning light was seeping through the crack under the door. She'd overslept. Rose scrambled off the cot, jamming her feet into her boots and running her fingers through her tangled hair. She had no mirror, no brush, no way to make herself presentable. She'd have to face the morning looking like she'd been dragged through a hedge backward. When she pushed open the pantry door, she found Jimmy standing at the stove with a coffee pot, looking entirely too cheerful for whatever ungodly hour it was. "Morning," he said with a grin. "Thought you might sleep through breakfast." "What time is it?" Rose asked, her voice rough with sleep. 5:30. "Don't worry, you didn't miss nothing. Men don't usually eat till 6. Rose relaxed slightly, then frowned. "You made coffee." "I can manage coffee," Jimmy said. "It's actual food that defeats me." He poured her a cup and handed it over. "Figured you earned a few extra minutes of sleep after last night." Rose took the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm tin. The kitchen was chilly. The stove had gone cold overnight, and she could see her breath in the air. "I need to get breakfast started," she said, moving toward the stove. "The men will be hungry." "They're always hungry," Jimmy agreed, "but they can wait a few minutes while you wake up proper." Rose wanted to argue, but the truth was she needed those few minutes. Her body ached from the long walk and the hard cot, and her mind felt foggy. She sipped the coffee, still terrible, but hot, and let the warmth seep into her bones. "Storm's past," Jimmy said, looking toward the window where gray dawn light filtered through. "Left us with about 2 feet of snow, but the winds died down." "That mean I could leave?" Rose asked. "If I wanted to?" Jimmy's expression grew serious. "That mean you want to?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than Rose intended. "No, I want to stay. I just wondered if I could leave, if things don't work out." "Things'll work out," Jimmy said with more confidence than Rose felt. "You'll see." Rose set down her coffee and moved to the stove, building up the fire with practiced efficiency. "Help me carry in some wood?" she asked. "I'll need a good supply to keep this going all day." They worked together in the pre-dawn quiet, hauling wood from the covered pile outside. The snow was deep, just as Jimmy had said, and pristine white in every direction. The world looked clean and new, like a fresh page waiting to be written on. By the time the men started filing in for breakfast, Rose had pancakes ready, real pancakes with syrup she'd made from brown sugar and water. She'd fried up bacon until it was crispy, scrambled 2 dozen eggs, and managed to bake another batch of biscuits because the men had devoured yesterday's supply. The Cowboys ate with the same enthusiasm as the night before, and Rose felt a small glow of satisfaction. This was something she was good at, something that mattered. Here, her skills had value. Here, she wasn't just the widow from the Rose Bell. She was the woman who could feed hungry men and make them grateful for it. After breakfast, Hank pulled her aside. "Miss Campbell," he said, looking uncomfortable. "We need to talk about arrangements." Rose's stomach tightened. "What kind of arrangements?" "Well, you can't keep sleeping in the pantry. It ain't right. And we need to figure out your wages, your duties, all that." He scratched his beard. "Problem is, I can't make them decisions. That's the boss's job." "When does he return?" "Day after tomorrow, most like, depending on the roads." Hank shifted his weight. "Look, I know you want this position, and the men want you to have it, but the boss, he's particular. Might take some convincing." "Then I'll convince him," Rose said firmly, "just like I convinced all of you." Hank smiled at that. "You got sand? I'll give you that. All right, here's what we'll do. You keep cooking, keep showing what you can do. When the boss gets back, we'll make the case together. All of us." It was the best Rose could hope for. She nodded. "What about today? What do you need from me?" 3 meals for 25 men, Hank said. "Same as yesterday. Think you can manage?" Rose almost laughed. "Mr. Hank, I once cooked for a Saturday night crowd of 50 at the Rose Bell. 25 ranch hands is nothing." She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. Hank's expression shifted, and she saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. "The Rose Bell," he said slowly. "That's a saloon. In Billings." Rose lifted her chin. "It is. I worked there after my husband died. Cooked in the kitchen, served drinks when they needed extra hands. It was honest work, and it kept me from starving." "That's so." Hank's voice had gone flat, carefully neutral. "Yes," Rose said, meeting his eyes. "That's so. And if that changes your mind about keeping me, I'd appreciate knowing now rather than later." Hank was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Rose held herself still, refusing to look away, refusing to show shame for something she wasn't ashamed of. Finally, Hank sighed. "Miss Campbell, I don't care if you worked in a saloon or a church. You can cook, and that's what matters to me. But I'll be straight with you. Some of the men might care, and the boss might care even more." "Let them care," Rose said. "Won't change the fact that I make the best biscuits they've ever tasted." Despite himself, Hank chuckled. "No, I don't suppose it will." He tipped his hat to her. "Keep doing what you're doing, Miss Campbell. We'll handle the rest when it comes." The day settled into a rhythm. Rose cooked, cleaned, and organized the kitchen with single-minded focus. She scrubbed every surface until it shone, organized the pantry so she could find things easily, and even tackled the grease-stained pots that had been shoved into corners and forgotten. Jimmy helped when he could, between his regular duties. Rose learned that he was one of the senior hands, trusted with the more difficult work: breaking horses, managing the breeding program, handling the ranch's business when the boss was away. "You're more than just a cowhand," Rose observed as they worked together to clean out the cold storage room. Jimmy shrugged. "I do what needs doing." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment, his hand still as he held a crate of carrots. "My father wanted me to have more than a cowhand's life. Made sure I got educated, learned to read and cipher. But this is what I love, the work, the horses, the land. So I use the education to be better at what I love." Rose understood that. She'd had education too. Her mother had insisted on it, teaching Rose to read and write and figure. It had seemed pointless at the time, when all Rose wanted was to help in the kitchen. But later, after everything fell apart, those skills had been the difference between complete destitution and barely scraping by. "Your father approve of your choice?" she asked. Jimmy's expression shuddered. "He's dead. So I reckon his approval don't matter much anymore." Rose recognized that tone, the one that said the subject was closed. She nodded and went back to work, and after a moment Jimmy did too. Lunch was beef sandwiches with fresh bread Rose had managed to bake in the morning, served with pickles and the last of the apple cobbler. Dinner was fried chicken. She'd found a coop behind the kitchen and liberated several hens, with mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans she'd discovered in the back of the pantry, canned from last summer's garden. The men ate like they'd never seen food before. Rose watched them from her station by the stove, ladling gravy and refilling plates, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Useful. Valued. Needed. It was a dangerous feeling. She knew that. Getting attached to this place, to these people, would only make it hurt more when she had to leave. But she couldn't help it. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she belonged somewhere. That night, as she cleaned up after dinner, Carson approached her. He'd been the silent, watchful one, the man who hadn't said a word to her since she'd arrived. "Miss Campbell," he said, his voice rough like he didn't use it often. "Got something to say?" Rose turned to face him, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm listening." "I was wrong about you," Carson said bluntly. "Thought you'd be trouble. Thought having a woman here would mess things up, make the men stupid and competitive." He paused. "But you got your head on straight. You work hard, don't complain, and you cook better than anyone I've known, so I'm sorry for judging you before I knew you." Rose was so surprised she almost dropped the plate she was holding. Thank you, Mr. Carson." "Just Carson." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with the conversation. "Anyway, wanted you to know. Some of us are on your side, whatever the boss says." He left before Rose could respond, disappearing into the night. She stood there for a moment, plate in hand, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. She had allies, people who saw her value, who were willing to stand up for her. It was more than she'd had in a long time. Jimmy found her a few minutes later, still standing in the same spot. "You all right?" he asked. "Carson apologized to me," Rose said, still processing. "Actually apologized." Jimmy laughed. "That's high praise from Carson. Man don't apologize unless he means it." Rose set down the plate and turned to face Jimmy. "Why are you helping me? Really helping me, I mean. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be everything the others probably whisper about. A saloon girl looking for a meal ticket, a woman who will cause nothing but trouble." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "You want the honest truth?" "Always." "Because I see myself in you," he said. "Someone trying to prove they're more than what people assume. Someone working twice as hard because they got something to prove." He met her eyes. "And because I think you deserve a chance. Same as anyone." Rose's throat tightened. "Jimmy, don't," he said gently. "Don't say nothing you might regret. Just take the help, Rose. Let someone be on your side for once." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Jimmy seemed to understand. He touched her shoulder briefly. A gesture of comfort, nothing more, and then left her to finish cleaning. That night, Rose lay on her cot with 2 blankets and a pillow someone had left outside the pantry door. The kitchen was warm from the day's cooking, and through the small window she could see stars scattered across the clear sky. Tomorrow would be another day of cooking, of proving herself. And the day after, the boss would return. Rose closed her eyes and tried not to think about what would happen then. She woke the next morning to the smell of smoke. Not the good smoke of a cooking fire, but the acrid, wrong smell of something burning that shouldn't be. Rose bolted upright, heart pounding, and threw open the pantry door. The kitchen was fine, no fire, no smoke, but the smell was stronger now and she could hear shouting from outside. Rose grabbed her coat and ran out into the pre-dawn darkness. Men were rushing toward the barn, and she could see flames licking up one side of the building, orange and terrible against the dark sky. "Fire!" someone was shouting. "Get the horses out!" Rose ran toward the chaos without thinking. The barn doors were open, and smoke was pouring out. Cowboys were leading terrified horses into the snow, fighting to control the panicked animals. "We need water!" Hank was shouting. "Buckets, now!" Rose spun and ran back to the kitchen, her mind racing. The pump was outside, but there were buckets in the cold storage. She grabbed as many as she could carry and ran back out, passing them to the nearest cowboy. "Form a line!" Hank was organizing. "Pump to the barn! Pass the buckets!" Rose found herself in the middle of the line, between Jimmy and another cowhand whose name she didn't know. Buckets came down the line, full going one direction, empty coming back. Her arms burned from the effort, and ice-cold water splashed her dress, soaking through to her skin. But she didn't stop. The fire was spreading, climbing toward the hayloft. If it reached the hay, the whole barn would go up like kindling. "It's no use!" someone shouted. "We can't stop it!" "Keep going!" Jimmy yelled back. "We save what we can!" Rose's hands were numb from the cold water, her shoulders screaming with exhaustion. But she kept passing buckets, kept moving, kept fighting. Then she heard it, a horse's scream from inside the barn. "There's still one in there!" a cowboy shouted, his face blackened with soot. Last stall in the back. I couldn't reach her. Forget it, Hank ordered. It's too dangerous. But Jimmy was already moving, dropping his bucket and running toward the barn entrance. Jimmy, no! Rose screamed. He didn't listen. He disappeared into the smoke, and Rose's heart stopped. She counted seconds. 10, 20, 30. He didn't come out. The other men kept working the bucket line, but Rose couldn't move. She stared at the barn entrance, willing Jimmy to appear, praying to a god she wasn't sure was listening. 40 seconds. 50. Then, through the smoke, she saw movement. Jimmy emerged, leading a terrified mare, his face covered with his bandana. The horse was wild with fear, rearing and fighting, but Jimmy held on, talking to her in a steady voice Rose couldn't hear over the chaos. He got the mare clear of the barn and handed her off to another cowboy. Then he bent double, coughing violently, his whole body shaking. Rose ran to him without thinking, putting her hands on his back. "Are you insane?" she demanded, her voice shaking with fear and anger. "You could have died!" Jimmy looked up at her, his eyes watering from the smoke. "Couldn't leave her," he said hoarsely. "She'd have burned." "Better the horse than you." "No," Jimmy said firmly. "Not to me." Before Rose could respond, there was a great cracking sound. Part of the barn's roof collapsed, sending sparks shooting into the sky. The men redoubled their efforts with the water, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. It took another hour before the fire was finally under control. The barn wasn't a total loss. They'd saved about half of it, but the damage was extensive. The hayloft was gone, several stalls were destroyed, and everything was charred and water damaged. As dawn broke, the exhausted men stood in the snow, surveying the destruction. "How'd it start?" Hank asked, his voice grim. "Don't know," one of the cowboys said. "I was checking on the horses before breakfast, smelled smoke, and found flames in the northwest corner. That's where we store the oil for the lamps," another man added. "Oil don't light itself," Carson said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. His expression was dark, suspicious. "You saying someone did this on purpose?" Hank demanded. "I'm saying oil don't light itself," Carson repeated. "And I'm saying we had a stranger arrive just before this fire happened." Rose felt the accusation like a physical blow. "You think I think it's mighty convenient," Carson said, looking at her directly. "Woman shows up out of nowhere, gets hired against all sense, and next thing we know, the barn's burning." "That's crazy," Jimmy said, stepping between Rose and Carson. "Rose was asleep in the pantry. I checked on her last night and she was—" "You checked on her?" Carson's eyebrows rose. "That's interesting, Jimmy. Real interesting." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jimmy's voice had gone dangerous. "Means maybe you ain't thinking straight," Carson said. "Means maybe a pretty face got you forgetting common sense." Jimmy moved forward, his fists clenched, but Rose grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's scared and looking for someone to blame. Don't give him a reason to make it worse." Jimmy looked at her, then at Carson, then slowly relaxed. "Carson, you're talking nonsense. Rose didn't start that fire." "Then who did?" Carson demanded. "Could have been an accident," Hank interjected. "Could have been a lamp fell over, or someone was careless with a match. Or could have been someone who don't want a woman on this ranch," Carson said. His eyes swept across the assembled men. "Could have been someone who figured if the barn burned, we'd blame the newcomer and send her packing." The implication hung in the air. If Carson was right, someone here had committed sabotage. Someone had been willing to risk the horses, the barn, all of it, just to get rid of Rose. "This ain't getting us nowhere," Hank said finally. "What's done is done. We got work to do, horses to relocate, damage to assess, and somehow we got to keep this ranch running." He looked at Rose. "Miss Campbell, you get back to the kitchen. Men'll need feeding, especially after this." Rose nodded, grateful for something to do, somewhere to go where she wasn't the subject of suspicion and anger. She walked back to the kitchen alone, her wet dress freezing against her skin. Her hands were blistered from the bucket line, her shoulders aching, and her heart heavy. Someone had set that fire, and whether they'd meant to frame her or just scare her away, the result was the same. She was now under suspicion, her position at the ranch more precarious than ever. And the boss was due back today. Rose built up the fire in the stove and started breakfast with mechanical efficiency. Oatmeal today. Simple, filling, cheap. They'd need to conserve supplies if they had to rebuild the barn. She made coffee, strong and bitter, and set out what was left of yesterday's bread. The men came in slowly, exhausted and subdued. They ate in silence, the usual camaraderie gone. Rose felt their glances, their whispers. Some looked sympathetic, others looked suspicious. Carson didn't come to breakfast at all. Jimmy stayed close, positioning himself near the stove where he could watch both Rose and the door. His presence should have been comforting, but it only made things worse. Now the men were whispering about that too, about how Jimmy was protecting her, defending her, spending too much time in her company. "Let them talk," Jimmy said quietly when she mentioned it. "I don't care what they think." "You should," Rose said. "Your reputation? My reputation can handle it," Jimmy interrupted. "Can yours?" Rose laughed bitterly. "I don't have a reputation to protect. Not anymore." After breakfast, Rose threw herself into work. She scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, prepared bread dough for lunch, and started a large pot of soup that could feed the men throughout the day while they worked on the barn repairs. She was kneading dough when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses moving fast. Rose's stomach dropped. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, peering out. 3 riders were coming up the road, and even from a distance, Rose could tell the lead rider was someone important. He sat his horse with authority, his posture straight and commanding. The boss. It had to be. Rose's mouth went dry. She watched as the riders approached the main house, as cowboys came running to take the horses, as Hank hurried forward to meet them. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw Hank gesturing toward the barn, saw the boss's reaction, anger, shock, saw him turn and look directly at the kitchen, at her. Rose stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. This was it. Whatever happened next would determine her future. She heard boots on the kitchen steps, heard the door open. Rose turned, straightening her spine, lifting her chin. The man who entered was not what she expected. He was young, maybe 30 at most, with dark hair and eyes that missed nothing, handsome in a sharp, dangerous way that made Rose think of wolves and winter storms. He wore fine clothes, though they were dusty from travel, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to command. But it was his eyes that caught Rose's attention. Winter blue eyes, shot through with gray. Eyes exactly like Jimmy's. "You must be the cook," the man said, his voice cool and measured. Rose found her voice. "Rose Campbell, sir. I am." "Ethan Stone," he said, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "And I understand you've been cooking for my men." His men, not the boss's men. His men. Rose's mind raced, putting pieces together. The education Jimmy had mentioned, the way he knew so much about the ranch's business, the authority he carried despite being just a cowhand. Jimmy wasn't just a cowhand at all. "Yes, sir," Rose managed. "I have." Without authorization, without proper vetting, without even a character reference. Ethan's voice remained calm, but Rose heard the steel beneath it. "Tell me, Miss Campbell, what made you think you could simply appear at my ranch and take a position without going through proper channels?" "I was told there was a job available," Rose said, keeping her voice steady. "I came prepared to work for it." "And you did, apparently. Impressed my men enough that they hired you on the spot." Ethan moved further into the kitchen, his eyes taking in every detail. The clean surfaces, the bread rising on the counter, the soup simmering on the stove. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Appearing just before my barn catches fire?" So he'd already heard the suspicions. Of course he had. "I had nothing to do with that fire," Rose said firmly. "So I've been told. My foreman says you were on the bucket line, working as hard as any man." Ethan's expression didn't change. "That doesn't prove innocence. Could just as easily prove guilt, someone trying to cover their tracks by playing hero." Rose felt anger flare hot in her chest. "I am many things, Mr. Stone, but I am not an arsonist. I needed this job. Why would I destroy the very place I was trying to make a home?" "Why indeed?" Ethan said softly. He moved to the stove, lifted the lid on the soup pot, inhaled. "Smells good." "It is good," Rose said. "Everything I make is good. Ask your men." "I have. They're quite enthusiastic about keeping you." Ethan replaced the lid and turned to face her fully. They also mentioned you worked at the Rosebell Saloon in Billings. There it was, the thing Rose had been waiting for. I did, she said, lifting her chin. I cooked there, sometimes served drinks. It was honest work, and I'm not ashamed of it. Honest work. Ethan's lips quirked in something that might have been amusement or disdain. The Rosebell has a certain reputation, Miss Campbell, not the kind of reputation I want associated with High Ridge Ranch. Then I suppose you should let me go, Rose said, her voice sharp. Send me back to Billings, back to the Rosebell, back to everything I was trying to escape. I'm sure your men will be thrilled to go back to burned beans and hard biscuits. Ethan studied her for a long moment. You've got fire in you. I'll give you that. Fire's useful in a kitchen, Rose shot back. Keeps things from freezing. To her surprise, Ethan laughed. A real laugh, not the cold, mocking sound she'd expected. My foreman was right. You do have sand. He sobered quickly. But that doesn't solve my problem. I can't have a woman of questionable background working on my ranch. It's not proper. Proper, Rose repeated. Mr. Stone, with all due respect, there's nothing proper about a ranch where grown men don't know how to cook a decent meal. There's nothing proper about letting good food go to waste because no one knows how to prepare it. And there's nothing proper about judging someone's worth based on where they had to work to survive. Ethan's expression hardened. You presume to lecture me about propriety? I presume to speak the truth, Rose said, something I suspect you don't hear often enough. The kitchen fell silent. Rose knew she'd crossed a line, knew she'd probably just guaranteed her dismissal, but she was tired of bowing and scraping, tired of apologizing for doing what she had to do to survive. If Ethan Stone was going to send her away, she'd at least leave with her dignity intact. Get out, Ethan said quietly. Rose's heart sank, but she nodded. Yes, sir, I'll gather my things. Not you, Ethan said, and Rose realized he was looking past her, toward the door. She turned and saw Jimmy standing there, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. You heard me, Ethan said to Jimmy. Get out. This is between me and Miss Campbell. Like hell it is, Jimmy said, stepping into the kitchen. You can't just... I can do whatever I want, Ethan interrupted, his voice cold. This is my ranch, or have you forgotten that while you were playing cowhand? Jimmy flinched like he'd been struck. I haven't forgotten anything. Haven't you? Ethan moved toward his brother, because that's what they were, Rose realized, brothers, not just employer and employee. You hired this woman without authorization. You vouched for her without knowing anything about her background. You've been spending time alone with her, defending her, making the men think there's something between you. There's nothing. Don't lie to me. Ethan's composure cracked, showing the anger beneath. I can see it in how you look at her, how you position yourself between her and anyone who might threaten her. You've compromised yourself, and worse, you've compromised this ranch. Jimmy's hands clenched into fists. I gave her a chance, that's all. A chance to prove she could do the work. And she did the work, Ethan acknowledged. She did it well, from what I hear. But that doesn't change the facts. She worked in a saloon. She has no references. And she appeared just before my barn burned down. She didn't start that fire, Jimmy said fiercely. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Jimmy stepped closer to his brother. I know because I know her. I know her character, her integrity. She's not capable of something like that. You've known her 2 days, Ethan said. 2 days, and you're ready to stake your reputation on her innocence? Yes. The simple certainty in Jimmy's voice made Rose's throat tight. No one had ever defended her like this, had ever believed in her so completely. Ethan shook his head. Then you're a fool. Maybe, Jimmy said, but I'd rather be a fool who gives people chances than a cynic who sees threats everywhere. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning beyond the immediate argument. Rose sensed old wounds here, old conflicts being played out in a new context. That's always been your problem, Ethan said quietly. You see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. And you see the worst, Jimmy countered, even when they're trying to do better. Ethan turned away, his shoulders tight with tension. This isn't about philosophy. This is about practical reality. I can't keep her here. Why not? Jimmy demanded. Because Ethan stopped, seemed to struggle with something. Because it's not safe. That brought Jimmy up short. Not safe? What are you talking about? But Ethan shook his head. It doesn't matter. The decision is made. Miss Campbell will leave when the roads are clear. No, Rose said. Both brothers turned to look at her. She'd been silent during their argument, letting them hash out whatever family drama was playing beneath the surface. But enough was enough. No? Ethan repeated, his eyebrows raised. I'm not leaving, Rose said. Not unless you physically throw me out. I've earned my place here, earned the right to stay. Your men want me here. The work needs doing, and I'm the one who can do it. Miss Campbell. No, Rose interrupted. You listen to me now, Mr. Stone. I don't know what your problem is, whether it's really about my background or about your brother's judgment or about something else entirely. But I know this. I am a good cook, I work hard, I don't cause trouble, and I deserve a chance to prove I can be more than my past. Ethan's jaw tightened. And if I don't agree? Then you're not the man your brother thinks you are, Rose said quietly. It was a gamble, and Rose knew it, but she saw something in Ethan's eyes, a flicker of doubt, of uncertainty. Whatever had happened between these brothers, Jimmy's opinion still mattered to Ethan, even if he didn't want to admit it. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, 1 week. Rose's heart leaped. What? 1 week, Ethan repeated. You can stay for 1 week. If there are no problems, if you do your work and stay out of trouble, we'll discuss a more permanent arrangement. It wasn't what Rose wanted, but it was something. It was a chance. Thank you, she said. Ethan nodded curtly. Don't make me regret this. He turned to Jimmy. And you, stay away from her, I mean it. Whatever's developing between you two, it ends now. Jimmy's expression went stony. You can't order me. I can, and I am, Ethan said. You want her to stay? Then you keep your distance, that's the condition. He left before either of them could respond, the kitchen door slamming behind him. Rose and Jimmy stood in silence, the weight of Ethan's ultimatum hanging between them. I'm sorry, Jimmy said finally, about all of this, about him. Don't apologize for your brother, Rose said. He's just trying to protect his ranch. He's trying to protect me, Jimmy corrected, from making what he considers a mistake. Rose looked at him sharply. Am I a mistake? No, Jimmy said immediately. No, Rose, you're not. But Ethan, he's got his reasons for being careful, for not trusting Easy. What reasons? Jimmy shook his head. Not my story to tell. He moved toward the door, then paused. 1 week. We'll make it work. I'll keep my distance like he said, but I'll still make sure you're safe. I can take care of myself. I know, Jimmy said with a small smile. But let me help anyway. From a distance. He left, and Rose was alone in the kitchen again. 1 week. 7 days to prove herself, to convince Ethan Stone that she was worth keeping. 7 days to figure out who had really started that fire and why. 7 days to decide if what she was feeling for Jimmy was real or just the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been drowning and found a hand reaching down. Rose took a deep breath and turned back to her bread dough. 1 week would have to be enough. The bread dough was soft beneath Rose's hands, yielding and warm from the heat of the kitchen. She kneaded it with more force than necessary, working out the tension that had coiled in her shoulders since Ethan Stone's ultimatum. 1 week, 7 days to prove she belonged here, while staying away from the one person who'd shown her genuine kindness. She shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise, then turned her attention to lunch. The men would be hungry after working on the barn repairs all morning. She decided on roasted chicken. There were still several birds in the coop, with root vegetables and the fresh bread once it was ready. As she worked, Rose's mind churned. Someone had set that fire. Someone who either wanted to frame her or scare her away. The question was who, and more importantly, why? What threat did a cook pose to anyone on this ranch? Unless it wasn't about her at all. Unless the fire had a different purpose entirely, and she was just convenient scapegoat. Rose was sliding the chickens into the oven when she heard voices outside. Raised, angry voices. She moved to the window and saw Ethan and Hank standing near the burned barn, deep in heated conversation. She couldn't make out the words, but their body language spoke volumes. Hank was gesturing emphatically, his face red. Ethan stood rigid, his arms crossed. The argument went on for several minutes before Ethan finally threw up his hands and stalked away toward the main house. Hank stood there for a moment, then turned and walked directly toward the kitchen. Rose stepped back from the window and busied herself with stirring the vegetables, trying to look like she hadn't been watching. Hank came in without knocking, his expression stormy. "Miss Campbell," he said without preamble, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Rose set down her spoon. "All right. Did you and Jimmy... Is there something between you two?" The question caught Rose off guard. "I don't see how that's your business." "It's my business when it affects this ranch," Hank said. "The boss is convinced Jimmy's judgment is compromised. Says that's why he hired you without proper consideration." "Jimmy hired me because I could cook," Rose said firmly, "because your men were eating garbage and someone needed to fix that." "Maybe so, but the boss sees it different." Hank sighed, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. "Look, I don't care if you two are sweet on each other. What I care about is keeping this ranch running smooth. And right now, nothing's smooth." Rose joined him at the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "What did Ethan say to you?" "Just now. Outside?" Hank hesitated, then seemed to decide she deserved the truth. "He wants me to watch you. Says if there's any sign of trouble, anything at all, you're gone immediately. No second chances." "I see." Rose kept her voice level, though her heart was sinking. "And what did you tell him?" "Told him he was being a damn fool," Hank said bluntly. "Told him we need you, that the men are happier and better fed than they've been in months. Told him firing you over suspicions and rumors would be the worst decision he could make." "I take it he disagreed." "He told me to mind my own business and do my job." Hank's jaw tightened. 20 years I've worked for the Stone family. 20 years, and he talks to me like I'm some greenhorn who don't know nothing." Rose heard the hurt beneath the anger. "He's afraid," she said quietly. Hank looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "I saw it in his eyes when he talked about safety, when he said it wasn't safe for me to be here." Rose leaned forward. "What's he afraid of, Hank? What happened that's got him so spooked?" Hank was quiet for a long time, staring at his weathered hands. Finally he said, "It ain't my place to tell you the whole story, but I'll say this much. Ethan's got cause to be careful about who he trusts, about who gets close to this family, because someone hurt them before." It wasn't a question, and Hank didn't treat it like one. I.e., someone they trusted, someone they let get close. It ended bad, real bad. And Ethan, he blames himself for not seeing it coming. Rose's mind raced, connecting pieces. Jimmy doesn't blame him. No, Hank agreed. Jimmy's got a more forgiving nature, always has. But that just makes Ethan more determined to protect him, even if it means protecting him from himself. From making the same mistake again, Rose said slowly. From trusting the wrong person. From trusting someone like you, Hank said, not unkindly. A woman who shows up out of nowhere, with a questionable past right when trouble starts. You can see how it looks. Rose nodded. She could see it, even if she didn't like it. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need work. A place to belong. May I believe you, Hank said. And I think, deep down, Ethan believes you too. But belief ain't enough when you're trying to protect someone you love. Fear's stronger than belief, especially when you got history backing it up. So what do I do? Rose asked. How do I prove I'm trustworthy when trust itself is the problem? You do exactly what you've been doing, Hank said, standing up. You work hard, keep your head down, and give him no cause for complaint. Time's the only thing that builds real trust. And maybe, if you're lucky, something will happen to prove you ain't the threat he thinks you are. After Hank left, Rose returned to her cooking with a heavy heart. She understood Ethan's position better now, but understanding didn't make it easier. She was trapped in a situation where no amount of good work could overcome the fear that drove his decisions. The men came in for lunch in shifts, some staying to work on the barn, while others ate. They were subdued, the usual banter missing. Rose caught whispered conversations that stopped when she got too close, saw the way some of them looked at her, not with hostility, but with pity. They knew. They knew Ethan had given her a week, knew she was living on borrowed time. Jimmy came in with the last group, carefully avoiding her eyes. He sat at the far end of the table and ate quickly, mechanically. Rose wanted to go to him, to tell him it was all right, that she understood why he had to keep his distance. But that would only make things worse. So she stayed by the stove and ladled food onto plates and pretended her heart wasn't breaking. After lunch, Rose decided to tackle the cold storage room. It needed a thorough cleaning, and the physical work would give her something to focus on besides her troubles. She was scrubbing shelves when she heard footsteps behind her. "Need some help?" Rose turned to find one of the younger cowboys standing in the doorway. She recognized him. His name was Danny, and he couldn't have been more than 19. "I can manage," Rose said. "Don't you have barn work?" "Hank gave me a break, said I was getting in the way more than helping." Danny stepped into the cold storage room, looking around. "This place is a mess. When's the last time anyone cleaned it proper?" "Based on the dust?" "Years." Rose wrung out her rag and moved to the next shelf. "But you don't need to help. I know Ethan wants people to keep their distance." "The boss can want whatever he likes," Danny said, grabbing a rag. "Don't mean I have to follow orders I think are stupid." Rose almost smiled. "Careful. That kind of talk could get you in trouble." "I'm always in trouble. Might as well be for a good cause." Danny started wiping down the opposite wall. "Besides, you saved my horse, remember? The mare Jimmy pulled out of the barn, that was mine. Sweet girl, I call her. Had her since she was a foal." Well, Rose did remember. The terrified mare, Jimmy risking his life to save her. "I'm glad she's all right." "Me too, and I know you didn't start that fire. Anyone with eyes can see you ain't the type." "What type is that?" Danny paused, considering. "The destructive type. You're a builder, not a breaker. Everything you touch, you make better. The kitchen, the food, even the way the men act. Everyone's more civil when there's a lady around." "I'm not a lady," Rose said automatically. "Sure you are. Maybe not the fancy kind with silk dresses and servants, but the real kind. The kind that works hard and don't complain and makes a place feel like home." Danny's young face was earnest. "That's what my ma always said. A real lady ain't about birth or money. It's about character." Rose's throat tightened. "Your mother sounds wise." "She was. She died when I was 12. Danny went back to his cleaning. "I remember she used to say that home ain't a place, it's a feeling. And you've given us that feeling, Miss Campbell. First time since I came to this ranch 3 years ago." They worked in companionable silence after that, and Rose found herself grateful for Danny's uncomplicated kindness. He didn't want anything from her, didn't have an agenda. He was just a young man who missed his mother and appreciated good cooking. When the cold storage room was cleaned, Danny helped her reorganize the supplies, putting the oldest items in front so they'd be used first. They were almost done when Rose noticed something odd. "Danny, when did you last see oil for the lamps?" Danny looked up from the crate he was moving. "Oil? Why?" "Someone said the fire started near where you store the lamp oil, but I don't see any in here." Rose gestured around the cold storage room. "This is where supplies are kept, right?" "Yeah, but we don't keep oil in here. Too dangerous. If it leaked, could contaminate the food." Danny straightened up, frowning. "We keep it in the small shed behind the barn. Always have." Rose's heart started beating faster. So there shouldn't have been any oil in the barn at all. Not unless someone brought it there for a reason. Danny's eyes widened as he understood. "Miss Campbell, if there was oil in that barn, someone put it there on purpose. Or someone lied about it being there at all," Rose said slowly. "To make it seem like an accident when it was really arson." Danny looked scared now. "We need to tell Hank, tell the boss." "And say what? That we noticed oil that shouldn't have been there isn't in the cold storage? They'll say we're making things up, trying to shift blame." Rose shook her head. "We need proof." "Proof of what?" "Proof of who really started that fire." Rose's mind was racing. "Danny, who told everyone the fire started near the oil?" Danny thought for a moment. "I don't rightly remember. There was so much confusion. Everyone shouting. Could have been anyone." "Think. It's important." Danny's brow furrowed with concentration. "I was helping with the horses, so I wasn't in the first group that fought the fire. But when I came running up, someone was yelling about the oil, about how it was feeding the flames. I think it was red." Red Callahan. Rose knew that name. Red was the hand who'd spread rumors about her working at the Rose Bell, the one Jimmy had knocked down and expelled from the ranch, or supposedly expelled. "Danny, is Red still here?" "No, ma'am. He left right after that fight with Jimmy, took his wages, and rode out." "When exactly?" "The morning before the fire." Danny's expression changed as he realized what Rose was implying. "But that don't make sense. If he left before the fire, he couldn't have started it." "Unless he didn't really leave," Rose said. "Unless he just pretended to leave and then came back to cause trouble." "Why would he do that?" Rose had several theories, none of them comforting. Revenge against Jimmy for humiliating him. Revenge against Rose for being the cause of that humiliation. Or maybe someone had paid him to cause problems, to make Rose look suspicious, but she kept those thoughts to herself. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." "How?" Rose considered. She had 1 week to prove herself trustworthy. 1 week before Ethan would likely send her away, convinced she was more trouble than she was worth. She could spend that week cooking and cleaning and hoping for the best, or she could take matters into her own hands. "I need to search the bunkhouse," Rose said. "If Red came back to start that fire, he might have left evidence, something that proves he was here." Danny looked doubtful. "The men are in and out all day. You'd be caught for sure." "Not if I go at night, after everyone's asleep." "Miss Campbell, that's crazy. If the boss finds out, he won't, because you're not going to tell him." Rose looked Danny in the eye. "You said you believe I'm innocent. Here's your chance to help prove it." Danny shifted uncomfortably. "I want to help, but nothing. Either you believe me or you don't." Rose softened her tone. "I'm not asking you to lie or take risks. Just don't say anything about our conversation. Can you do that?" After a long moment, Danny nodded. "All right. But Miss Campbell, be careful. If someone did set that fire on purpose, they might not be done causing trouble." Rose had already considered that possibility. Whoever had started the fire had wanted one of two things, either to frame her or to frighten her away. The first hadn't worked. Ethan was suspicious, but hadn't outright accused her. So if she was right about this, the culprit might try again. She'd just have to make sure she was ready. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work. Rose prepared dinner, venison stew with dumplings, using meat from the ranch's stores, and watched the men eat. She was looking for signs now, studying faces and behavior. Who seemed nervous? Who avoided her eyes? Who watched her too closely? Carson was his usual taciturn self, eating steadily without comment. Hank looked tired, the weight of the day's conflict showing in his lined face. Several of the younger hands joked and laughed, seemingly unconcerned with the tension swirling around them. And Jimmy sat at the far end of the table, honoring his brother's demand to keep his distance, though his eyes kept straying to Rose when he thought no one was looking. Ethan didn't come to dinner. Rose suspected he was taking his meals in the main house, avoiding both her and the men who'd voiced their support for keeping her. After dinner, Rose cleaned the kitchen with meticulous care. She banked the fire in the stove, washed every dish, swept the floor. Then she retreated to her pantry cot and waited. She waited until the sounds from the bunkhouse died down, until she heard the last man settle into bed. She waited until the ranch was dark and quiet, with only the wind whistling around the buildings. Then she rose, pulled on her coat, and slipped out into the night. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the snow. Rose moved carefully, staying in the shadows, acutely aware that if anyone saw her skulking around at night, it would only confirm Ethan's suspicions. The bunkhouse loomed before her, dark except for the dying glow of the potbelly stove visible through the windows. Rose circled around to the back, where a small window stood partially open for ventilation. It was narrow, but she thought she could squeeze through. She was halfway through the window, balanced precariously with her legs still outside, when she heard a voice behind her. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Rose's heart stopped. She knew that voice. Slowly, awkwardly, she pulled herself back out of the window and turned to find Ethan Stone standing in the shadows, his arms crossed, and his expression utterly unreadable. "Mr. Stone," Rose said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I can explain." "I'm sure you can. The question is whether I'll believe you." Ethan stepped into the moonlight, and Rose saw he was fully dressed, despite the late hour. "You have 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't throw you off this ranch right now." Rose's mind raced. She could lie, make up some excuse about why she was breaking into the bunkhouse in the middle of the night. But lies had a way of unraveling, and she had the distinct impression that Ethan Stone was very good at spotting them. So she told the truth. "I'm looking for evidence," she said. "Evidence that Red Callahan came back after he left and started that fire." Ethan's expression didn't change. Based on what? Based on the fact that there shouldn't have been lamp oil in the barn where the fire started. Based on the fact that Red was the one who told everyone the oil caused the fire, even though he supposedly left the ranch before it happened. Rose took a step forward. Based on the fact that someone is trying to make me look guilty, and I'm going to find out who. By breaking into my men's quarters. By searching for proof, Rose corrected. Something Red might have left behind. A bottle of oil, matches, anything that shows he was here when he claimed to be gone. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying her. "You realize how this looks. You sneaking around at night, invading the men's privacy." "I realize how it looks," Rose said. "I also realize I have 1 week to prove I'm trustworthy, and sitting quietly in my pantry isn't going to accomplish that." "So you decided to prove your trustworthiness by doing something completely untrustworthy." "I decided to prove my innocence by finding the truth." Rose lifted her chin. "You can throw me out for it if you want, but at least I'll know I tried." Ethan stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then, to Rose's complete shock, he said, "Which bunk was Red's?" Rose blinked. "What? Which bunk did Red Callahan sleep in?" Ethan spoke slowly, like he was addressing someone simple. "If we're going to search, we should probably know where to look." "We? You think I'm going to let you stumble around in there in the dark, waking my men and causing chaos?" Ethan moved to the window. "I know this bunkhouse like the back of my hand. I can get us in and out without anyone knowing." Rose couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You're going to help me?" "I'm going to find out the truth," Ethan corrected. "If that helps you in the process, so be it. But if we find evidence that you're involved in this, you're gone. Understood?" "Understood." Ethan boosted himself through the window with an ease that spoke of practice. He'd clearly done this before. Rose followed, and this time, when she got stuck halfway, Ethan grabbed her arms and pulled her through. Inside, the bunkhouse was dark except for the faint glow from the stove. Rose could hear men breathing, snoring, the soft sounds of sleep all around them. Ethan put a finger to his lips and gestured for her to follow. They moved like ghosts between the rows of bunks. Ethan led her to the far corner, to an empty bunk with a thin mattress and a footlocker beneath it. Red's bunk. Ethan knelt and opened the footlocker carefully, mindful of the hinges that might squeak. Inside was mostly empty. Red had taken his belongings when he'd left. But Ethan felt along the bottom and sides, checking for anything hidden. Nothing. Rose felt disappointment settle heavy in her stomach. She'd been so sure they'd find something. But Ethan wasn't done. He felt along the bunk frame, checking the joints and corners. Then he lifted the mattress and ran his hands along the ropes that supported it. His fingers stopped. He looked at Rose, then carefully worked something free from where it had been wedged between the rope and the frame. It was a small glass bottle, empty but still reeking of lamp oil. Rose's breath caught. Evidence. Actual evidence that Red had been involved. But Ethan was frowning. He held the bottle up to the faint light, examining it closely. Then he set it aside and kept searching. He found a box of matches tucked into a gap in the wooden frame. And then, wrapped in a piece of cloth and hidden in the very corner of the bunk, he found something that made him go very still. Money. A thick roll of bills, more than a ranch hand would see in months of work. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring at the money. Rose crouched beside him, her mind reeling. "Payment," she whispered. "Someone paid him to start that fire. Or to do something else," Ethan said quietly. "The fire might have been a separate plan, or it might have been the goal all along." He looked at her. "Either way, you were right. Red was involved, and he didn't act alone." "Who would pay him to burn your barn?" Rose asked. Ethan's expression was grim. "That's the question, isn't it?" He carefully returned everything to its hiding place, exactly as they'd found it. We can't let on that we know. If whoever hired Red realizes we're onto them, they'll disappear, or worse. What could be worse than arson? Ethan stood, pulling Rose to her feet. You'd be surprised what people are capable of when they're desperate or angry enough. They made their way back to the window, moving carefully through the sleeping men. Rose was almost there when her foot caught on something, a boot left carelessly by a bunk. She stumbled, catching herself on the bunk frame. The man in the bunk stirred, mumbling. Rose froze, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Ethan's hand closed around her wrist, steadying her. He waited until the man settled back into sleep, then guided Rose the rest of the way to the window. They climbed out into the cold night air, and Rose realized she was shaking. Whether from fear or cold or the adrenaline of nearly being caught, she wasn't sure. That was too close, Ethan said, his voice low. But we found something. We found proof. We found questions, Ethan corrected. Proof of Red's involvement, yes, but no proof of who hired him or why. He turned to look at her fully. And no proof of your innocence, beyond the obvious fact that you wouldn't search for evidence if you were guilty. Is that enough? Rose asked. Enough for you to trust me? Ethan was quiet for a moment. I don't trust easily, Miss Campbell. I have my reasons, as I'm sure Hank told you. He mentioned something happened, something that made you cautious. Cautious, Ethan repeated with a bitter laugh. That's a kind word for it. Paranoid would be more accurate. He started walking, and Rose fell into step beside him. 3 years ago, I trusted someone. Brought them into my family, into my home. They seemed perfect, kind, honest, hardworking. What happened? They stole everything they could carry and tried to burn down the main house when they left. Ethan's voice was flat, emotionless. Jimmy was inside. He nearly died from the smoke before I got him out. Rose's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God. The person I trusted, the one I'd vouched for and defended, had been planning it for months, using my trust, Jimmy's affection, to get close enough to hurt us. Ethan stopped walking, his shoulders rigid. So you'll forgive me if I see parallels. A stranger appearing out of nowhere, winning over the men, getting close to my brother, and then fire. I'm not that person, Rose said fiercely. I'm not here to hurt anyone. So you say, and maybe I even believe you. Ethan looked at her. But believing isn't the same as trusting. Trust has to be earned, and it takes more than a few days and some good cooking. What does it take? Time, consistency, proof that you are who you claim to be through action, not words. Ethan resumed walking. Finding that evidence tonight was a start. Shows you're willing to fight for the truth, even at risk to yourself. They'd reached the kitchen. Rose stopped at the door, looking at Ethan. What now? What do we do about Red and the money? We wait, Ethan said. We watch. Whoever hired Red will make another move eventually. People like that always do. And if they make that move against me, then we'll be ready. Ethan's expression softened slightly. Despite what you might think, Miss Campbell, I don't want to see you hurt. I just want to protect what's mine. Your brother. My family, Ethan corrected. Such as it is. Jimmy is all I have left, and I'll be damned if I let someone hurt him again, even if that someone is you. Rose understood. She might not like it, but she understood. I won't hurt him. I give you my word. Words are cheap, Ethan said. Show me through actions, and maybe I'll believe you. He turned to leave, then paused. Miss Campbell, that stunt tonight, breaking into the bunkhouse? Don't do it again. Next time you have a suspicion or a theory, you come to me first. Understood? Understood. Good. Now get some sleep. You've got breakfast to make in a few hours. Ethan disappeared into the darkness, heading toward the main house. Rose slipped into the kitchen, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She'd found evidence. She'd proven Red was involved in the fire. But more than that, she'd earned a grudging sliver of respect from Ethan Stone. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something, and it would have to be enough. Rose lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Jimmy, about the fire that had nearly killed him 3 years ago. Not yet, but it was something, and it would have to be enough. Rose lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Jimmy, about the fire that had nearly killed him 3 years ago. Thought about how that betrayal had shaped Ethan, had turned him from someone who trusted into someone who suspected everyone. She thought about the money hidden in Red's bunk, about who might have paid him and why, about what they might try next now that the fire had failed to drive her away, and she thought about the 1 week she had left to prove herself. 6 days now, really. 6 days to find the real culprit, to earn Ethan's trust, and to figure out what these feelings for Jimmy really meant. 6 days to build a future or lose everything. Rose closed her eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. And when it finally did, her dreams were full of fire and smoke and winter blue eyes watching her from the shadows. She woke to the sound of shouting. Rose bolted upright, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness. The shouting continued, multiple voices, angry and afraid. She threw on her coat and ran outside. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Men were gathered around the well, and even from a distance, Rose could see something was wrong. The bucket hung at an odd angle, and water wasn't flowing right. She ran toward the group, her heart sinking as she got closer. The well rope had been cut, not frayed or broken, but cleanly severed, and floating in the water below, visible even in the dim light, was something dark and oily. Someone had poisoned the well. Hank turned as Rose approached, his face grim. Someone dumped lamp oil in the water. The whole well's contaminated. Won't be usable for days, maybe weeks. Rose's stomach dropped. Without the well, the ranch had no water. The snow could be melted, but it would be a massive undertaking to provide enough for 25 men, plus all the horses and livestock. "When did this happen?" she asked. "Sometime in the night. It was fine at evening check." Hank looked around at the assembled men. Someone did this after everyone was asleep. Rose felt eyes turning toward her. She'd been out last night, skulking around. If anyone had seen her. It wasn't her. Everyone turned to find Ethan standing at the edge of the group. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, his hair disheveled and his eyes shadowed. "How do you know?" Carson asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Because she was with me," Ethan said calmly. "Last night I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. Found Miss Campbell in the kitchen, also unable to sleep. We talked for several hours." It was a lie. A bald-faced lie to protect her. Rose stared at Ethan in shock. "Talked about what?" Carson pressed. "Ranch business. Menus for the coming weeks, none of your concern." Ethan's voice held an edge of command. "The point is, Miss Campbell has an alibi. So unless one of you saw someone else out last night, we're back to square one." The men shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke up. "All right then," Hank said. "We got work to do. Start melting snow for drinking water, and someone ride to town for fresh water barrels. We'll get through this." The group dispersed, but Rose stayed frozen in place. Ethan had just lied for her, had given her an alibi, protected her from suspicion. Why? Ethan met her eyes across the distance, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Rose with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Someone was escalating. First the fire, now the well. Someone was trying to destroy this ranch, piece by piece, and they were running out of time to stop them. Rose stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she tried to prepare breakfast with melted snow water. The liquid was clean enough after boiling, but the process was maddeningly slow. Every pot she owned was on the stove, filled with snow that took forever to melt and even longer to heat. The men would be hungry soon, and she had barely enough water to make coffee, let alone cook a proper meal. She was stirring a pot when the door opened and Jimmy walked in. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes damp from hauling snow. "Rose," he said, then stopped, seeming to remember his brother's orders about keeping distance. "Miss Campbell, I brought more snow." "Thank you." Rose kept her eyes on the pot, not trusting herself to look at him. "You can leave it by the stove." Jimmy set down the bucket, but he didn't leave. "I heard what Ethan said about you being with him last night." Rose's stirring faltered. "He was protecting me, giving me an alibi." "I know. Question is, why were you out last night in the first place?" Rose debated lying, but she was tired of deception. "I was searching Red's bunk, looking for evidence that he started the fire." Jimmy's eyes widened. "Alone?" Rose, that was stupid? Reckless? Rose finally looked at him. I know, but I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait to be blamed for things I didn't do. Did you find anything? Rose glanced toward the door, making sure they were alone. Lamp oil, matches, and money, a lot of money, hidden in his bunk. Jimmy let out a low whistle. Someone paid him. That's what Ethan thinks too. He found it with me. Rose saw Jimmy's expression shift, something like jealousy flickering across his features. He caught me trying to break in, decided to help rather than throw me out. My brother helped you break into the bunkhouse. Jimmy shook his head in disbelief. Never thought I'd see the day. He's not as closed off as he pretends, Rose said quietly. He's just afraid of being betrayed again. Jimmy's jaw tightened. He told you about that? About what happened 3 years ago? Some of it, about the person you both trusted, who tried to burn down the house with you inside. Rose set down her spoon and turned to face Jimmy fully. He's protecting you. Maybe too much, but his heart's in the right place. His heart's in the past, Jimmy said bitterly. He can't see that not everyone is like Catherine. Some people are exactly who they claim to be. Catherine. So that was the name of the woman who'd betrayed them. Rose filed it away, another piece of the puzzle. Give him time, Rose said. He's starting to come around. The fact that he helped me last night, that he lied to give me an alibi, that means something. It means he's more concerned with justice than with his prejudices, Jimmy said. That's different from trusting you. It's a start. Jimmy moved closer, lowering his voice. Rose, whoever poisoned that well is getting desperate. The fire didn't work, so they're trying something else. And they're doing it at night, when everyone's asleep and vulnerable. I know. Which means you're not safe. If they realize you're searching for evidence, that you're getting close to the truth. Jimmy's hand reached out, then stopped, hovering in the air between them as he remembered the rules about distance. I can't protect you if I'm supposed to stay away. I don't need protection, Rose said, even though her heart was racing at his nearness. I need answers. Who would want to destroy this ranch? Who benefits from poisoning the well and burning the barn? Someone who wants to buy the land cheap, Jimmy said, or someone with a grudge against our family, or He stopped, his expression darkening. Or what? Or someone who wants to prove I'm incompetent, that I can't be trusted to help run this place. Jimmy's voice was low, angry. Ethan and I have been arguing about the ranch's future. He wants to expand, buy more land, take on debt. I think we should stay small, sustainable. We've been at odds for months. Rose's mind raced. You think someone's trying to sabotage you? To make Ethan lose faith in your judgment? It would explain the timing. Everything started when you arrived, but maybe that's not about you at all. Maybe you're just a convenient scapegoat. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair. If Ethan thinks my judgment is compromised because of you, if he thinks I'm making decisions based on emotion rather than logic, then he won't trust you with important ranch business, Rose finished. And whoever's behind this gets what they want. They stood in silence, the implications settling over them like snow. If Jimmy was right, then Rose wasn't the target at all. She was just a tool being used to drive a wedge between the brothers. Who knows about your disagreement with Ethan? Rose asked. About the ranch's future? Everyone. We've been arguing about it in front of the men for weeks. Jimmy's expression was grim. Hank knows, Carson knows. Hell, probably half of Montana knows by now. Then any of them could be involved. Or none of them. Could be someone in town, someone who's been waiting for the right moment to strike. Jimmy finally let his hand drop, giving up on the gesture he'd been about to make. We're looking for a ghost, Rose. Someone smart enough to cover their tracks and patient enough to wait for the perfect opportunity. Rose turned back to her pots, mind churning. The money in Red's bunk, that's real evidence. Maybe we can trace it, figure out where it came from. How? Cash is cash, unless it was marked somehow. Jimmy stopped. Wait, did Ethan mention anything unusual about the bills? Rose tried to remember. He examined them closely. Seemed surprised by something, but we were interrupted before he could say what. I need to talk to him. Jimmy moved toward the door, then paused. Rose, be careful today. Whoever's doing this, they're escalating. Fire, then poisoning. What comes next could be worse. After Jimmy left, Rose tried to focus on breakfast, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about Catherine, the woman who'd betrayed the Stone brothers. What had driven her to such extremes? Love turned sour, greed, simple malice, and was history repeating itself now, with a different betrayer using a different method? The men filed in for breakfast, a meager offering of oatmeal and hard biscuits, all Rose could manage with the limited water. They ate without complaint, understanding the situation, but Rose saw their worried glances. A ranch without water was a ranch in crisis. After breakfast, Rose was washing dishes when Hank appeared. "Miss Campbell, got a minute?" Rose dried her hands. "Of course." Hank looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Last night, when the boss said you were with him, was that true?" Rose's heart sank. Hank deserved the truth, but the truth would implicate her in breaking into the bunkhouse. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've known Ethan Stone since he was born, and I know when he's lying to protect someone." Hank's eyes were kind but sharp. "He gave you an alibi. Question is, did you need one?" Rose made a decision. If she couldn't trust Hank, she couldn't trust anyone. "I was searching Red's bunk, looking for evidence about the fire." Hank's eyebrows rose. "And did the boss catch you?" "He helped me. We found lamp oil, matches, and money. A lot of money, hidden in Red's things." "Well, I'll be damned." Hank pulled out a chair and sat heavily. "So Red was paid to start that fire, and the boss knows this?" "Yes, but we put everything back exactly as we found it. We didn't want whoever hired Red to know we're on to them." Hank nodded slowly. "Smart, but risky. If you'd been caught by anyone else, I know. But I was desperate. I have had 1 week to prove myself, and I couldn't do that sitting idle." "About that." Hank leaned forward. "The boss came to me this morning, said he's extending your trial period. Indefinitely. Until we sort out what's happening here." Rose's breath caught. "He said that?" "Said you've proven yourself resourceful and brave, and he'd be a fool to send you away when you might be the key to solving this whole mess." Hank smiled slightly. "Didn't say he trusts you yet, mind, but he's willing to give you more time." Relief flooded through Rose so strong it made her dizzy. "Thank you for telling me." "There's more. The boss wants you to keep your eyes and ears open. You're in the kitchen all day and men talk around meals. They might let something slip, some detail that points to who's behind this." You want me to spy on the men who've been kind to me," Rose said slowly. "I want you to help catch whoever's trying to destroy this ranch," Hank corrected. "Those are your men too now. You got a stake in keeping this place safe." He was right. Somewhere along the way, High Ridge Ranch had become home. These men, rough and flawed as they were, had become something like family. The idea of one of them being a traitor twisted Rose's stomach into knots. "I'll listen," Rose agreed. "But Hank, I don't think it's one of our men. I think it's someone outside using Red and maybe others to do their dirty work." "Could be, but we can't rule anything out." Hank stood. "Just be careful, Miss Campbell. Whoever this is, they ain't playing games." The rest of the day passed in a haze of work. Rose cooked, cleaned, and listened. She heard the men complain about the water situation, heard them speculate about who might be behind the sabotage, heard their fears about what might happen next. But she heard nothing that pointed to a culprit. Danny helped her haul more snow for melting, and during a quiet moment she asked him about the money they'd found. If someone wanted to pay Red to cause trouble, where would they get that kind of cash, she asked. Danny thought about it. Bank, I guess. Or if they're rich, might just have it lying around. What about earning it? What kind of work pays that well? Cattle sales, maybe, land deals, or... Danny's eyes widened. Miss Campbell, you don't think someone sold something to get that money, like rustled cattle or stolen goods? Rose hadn't thought of that, but it made sense. Is there a way to check, to see if any cattle have gone missing? Hank would know. He keeps careful count. Danny looked troubled. But if someone's been rustling from us to pay for sabotaging us, that's twisted. That's desperate, Rose corrected, and desperate people are dangerous. As evening approached, Rose prepared dinner, another simple meal of beans and cornbread, using as little water as possible. The men ate quietly, their usual cheer dampened by the day's hardships. Jimmy sat at his usual distant spot, barely eating. Rose caught him watching her several times, his expression troubled. She wanted to go to him, to tell him it would be all right, but Ethan's rules still stood. Distance, safety, protection from another betrayal. After dinner, as Rose was cleaning up, Ethan himself appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Miss Campbell." A word. Rose set down her dish towel and followed him outside into the cold evening air. The sky was clear, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening twilight. "I've been thinking about that money," Ethan said without preamble, "about where it might have come from." Danny suggested rustling, selling stolen cattle to fund the sabotage. Possible, but risky. Cattle sales leave records, witnesses. Ethan pulled something from his pocket, a single bill. "I went back to Red's bunk while the men were at dinner, took one of the bills to examine properly." He held it up to the fading light, and Rose saw what had caught his attention. In the corner, barely visible, was a mark. Not official bank markings, but something else, a small symbol drawn in ink. "What is it?" Rose asked. "A brand, not for cattle, but for money." Ethan's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Rich men sometimes mark their bills this way so they can track where their money goes. It's rare, but I've seen it before. So whoever paid Red is wealthy enough to mark their money, and arrogant enough to think no one would notice." Ethan pocketed the bill. "This symbol, I've seen it before. I just can't remember where." Rose's mind was racing. Someone rich with a grudge against your family, or someone who benefits from the ranch failing. Who fits that description? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "There's a man in Helena, Marcus Thornton. He's been trying to buy our land for years, ever since the railroad announced plans to expand through this area. We've refused every offer. So he might try to force you to sell by making the ranch unprofitable? It's possible, but Thornton's not stupid. He wouldn't use marked bills if he was trying to hide his involvement." Ethan frowned. "Unless he wanted us to find them. Unless this is all some elaborate game to him." The idea was chilling. Someone playing with their lives like chess pieces, orchestrating disasters for amusement or profit. "What do we do?" Rose asked. "We spring the trap." Ethan's eyes were hard. "Tomorrow, I'm riding to Helena. I'm going to visit Thornton, see if I can rattle him, get him to reveal something. While I'm gone, you and Jimmy need to watch the ranch. Keep the men safe and watch for any more sabotage." "Jimmy and I working together? I thought you wanted us to keep distance." "I wanted to protect him from making another mistake." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "But I've been watching you, Miss Campbell. The way you work, the way you care for the men, the way you risked yourself to find the truth. You're not Catherine. You're not here to hurt us." Rose's throat tightened. "You trust me?" "I'm starting to, and trust is something I don't give lightly." Ethan turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think Jimmy's judgment about you was sound. I was wrong to question it." He left Rose standing in the cold, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Trust, acceptance, the beginning of something that felt like belonging. She went back inside to find Jimmy waiting in the kitchen. "I heard," he said, "Ethan's going to Helena. He trusts me to help watch the ranch." Rose couldn't keep the wonder from her voice. "He actually trusts me." Jimmy smiled, and it transformed his face. "Told you he'd come around." He moved closer, and this time there was no hesitation. "Rose, while he's gone, we should talk," Rose said. "Really talk about what's happening between us." "What is happening between us?" Jimmy's voice was soft. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm falling for a woman who appeared in a blizzard and turned my whole world upside down." Rose's heart stuttered. "Jimmy, I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I also know that when I saw you on that bucket line, fighting that fire, all I could think was that I couldn't lose you." Jimmy's hand came up, gently touching her cheek. "Can't lose you, Rose." Rose leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough. Know you're strong and brave and stubborn. I know you make the best biscuits in Montana, and you're not afraid to stand up to my brother. I know you've been hurt before, and you're terrified of being hurt again." Jimmy's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. And I know I want to be the one who proves not all men are like your late husband. Thomas was a drunk and a fool, Rose said, opening her eyes. But he taught me an important lesson. Love isn't enough. You need trust too, and respect, and I'm offering all of that. Jimmy's voice was earnest. I'm offering you a partner, Rose, not a master or a savior. A partner. Rose wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into whatever this was between them, but fear held her back, fear of being hurt, of being abandoned, of building something beautiful only to watch it burn. What if Ethan's right? She whispered. What if I am too much like Catherine? What if I hurt you without meaning to? Then I'll heal and move on. That's life, Rose. Risk and reward, pain and joy. Jimmy's other hand came up, cradling her face. But I don't think you'll hurt me. I think you're exactly what this family needs, what I need. Before Rose could respond, before she could think of all the reasons this was a bad idea, Jimmy kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, asking permission even as it offered promise. Rose's hands came up to grip his shirt, and she kissed him back with all the longing and fear and hope that had been building inside her since that first night in the blizzard. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jimmy rested his forehead against hers. Say you'll give this a chance, he murmured. Give us a chance. Rose knew she should be cautious, knew she should protect her heart until she was sure, until the saboteur was caught and the danger had passed. But standing here in Jimmy's arms, feeling safe and wanted for the first time in years, caution felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll give us a chance. Jimmy's smile was brilliant, joy radiating from him like sunlight. He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper. And Rose let herself fall, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. They were so lost in each other that neither of them heard the footsteps approaching the kitchen. Neither of them saw the figure standing in the shadows outside, watching through the window with cold, calculating eyes. Neither of them knew that their moment of happiness had just sealed their fate. The next morning, Ethan left for Helena before dawn. Rose woke to find a note slipped under her pantry door. Watch over Jimmy. Watch over the ranch. I'm counting on you. E.S. Rose tucked the note into her pocket and set about making breakfast. The water situation was still dire, but one of the men had rigged a system to melt snow more efficiently. It wasn't perfect, but it would do until the well could be cleaned and refilled. Jimmy appeared as she was setting out plates, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in days. His eyes found hers across the room, and the warmth in them made her stomach flutter. Morning, he said, his voice carrying an intimacy that hadn't been there before. Morning? Rose couldn't help but smile. The men noticed, of course. Cowboys were observant about things like this, and the tension between Rose and Jimmy had been building for days. She saw knowing glances exchanged, heard a few good-natured chuckles, but no one said anything. If the boss's brother wanted to court the cook, that was their business. After breakfast, Jimmy found Rose in the cold storage room. I have to ride out to check the north fence line, he said. Should be back by noon. Will you be all right here? I'll be fine. I have work to keep me busy. Jimmy hesitated. Be careful, Rose. Keep the kitchen door locked. Don't let anyone in unless you know them. You're worrying too much. Someone poisoned our well and tried to burn down the barn. I'm worrying exactly the right amount. Jimmy touched her face briefly. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. She watched him ride out, her heart tight with worry she wouldn't voice. Then she returned to the kitchen and threw herself into work. Rose was kneading bread dough when she heard a horse approach. She wiped her hands and went to the window, expecting to see one of the ranch hands returning early. Instead, she saw a stranger, a well-dressed man on a fine horse, picking his way carefully through the snow. He dismounted near the main house, looked around with an air of ownership that immediately set Rose's teeth on edge, then turned and walked directly toward the kitchen. Rose's instincts screamed danger. She moved quickly to the door, throwing the bolt just as the man reached for the handle. He knocked. Hello? Anyone here? I'm looking for Ethan Stone. Rose stayed silent, her heart pounding. I saw smoke from the chimney. I know someone's in there. The man's voice was smooth, educated. I'm Marcus Thornton from Helena. I have business with Mr. Stone. Thornton. The man Ethan had gone to see. The man who wanted to buy the ranch. What was he doing here? Mr. Stone isn't available, Rose called through the door. You'll have to come back another time. I'm afraid this can't wait. It's about the recent difficulties you've been experiencing. The fire. The well. A pause. I think I can help. Rose's mind raced. This could be a coincidence, Thornton arriving just as Ethan went to confront him. Or it could be exactly what Ethan feared, a trap, a game, another move on the chessboard. I'm just the cook, Rose said. I can't discuss ranch business with you. Then perhaps you could fetch someone who can. The foreman, maybe? Hank was out with the other men, supervising the well cleaning. Rose was alone. Everyone's working, she said. Come back this evening. Another pause. Then Thornton's voice changed, losing its smoothness and gaining an edge. I know you're in there alone, Miss Campbell. I know Ethan Stone rode out this morning, and his brother went to check fence lines. I know the foreman and all the hands are at the well. Fear shot through Rose. He'd been watching, planning. What do you want? She asked, backing away from the door. Just to talk, to make you an offer. The door handle rattled. Open the door, Miss Campbell. This doesn't have to be difficult. No. No? Thornton laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what I've invested in this plan? The money I've spent? I paid Red Callahan to cause trouble, to make this ranch unprofitable. I poisoned the well myself, under cover of darkness, all to force the Stones to sell. He was confessing. Why was he confessing unless he planned to? The window shattered. Rose screamed and dove behind the table as glass rained down. Thornton climbed through, brushing shards from his expensive coat. That was unnecessary, he said calmly, but effective. Now, Miss Campbell, let's talk about your future. Rose grabbed a knife from the counter, holding it in front of her with shaking hands. Stay back. Or what? You'll stab me? Thornton smiled. I don't think so. You're not a killer, Rose. You're a survivor. That's why I'm here, to offer you a way to survive what's coming. What's coming? The end of High Ridge Ranch. One way or another, the Stones will sell to me. Either because their ranch has become unprofitable, or because... He paused, his smile widening. Or because tragedy forces their hand. You're going to hurt them. Rose's voice shook with rage. You're going to hurt Jimmy. Only if necessary. I'd prefer to avoid violence, which is where you come in. Thornton moved closer, and Rose raised the knife higher. You care about Jimmy Stone. That much is obvious. So here's my offer. Convince him to persuade his brother to sell. Do that, and everyone stays safe. You, Jimmy, even Ethan. Refuse, and I'll make sure this ranch burns to the ground with everyone in it. You're insane. I'm determined. There's a difference. Thornton's eyes were cold, calculating. The railroad is coming, Miss Campbell. This land will be worth 10 times what it is now. The Stones are sitting on a fortune and don't even realize it. I'm offering them a fair price for something they're about to lose anyway. They'll never sell, not to you, not after what you've done. Then they'll lose everything, and you'll lose Jimmy. Thornton reached into his coat and pulled out a small bottle. Rose recognized the smell immediately. Lamp oil. I can be very persuasive when I need to be. Fire is such an effective motivator. Rose's grip on the knife tightened. She thought about screaming, but the men were too far away to hear. Thought about running, but Thornton stood between her and both exits. Thought about fighting, but she was a cook, not a warrior. But she was also a survivor, and survivors did what they had to do. All right, Rose said, lowering the knife slightly. All right, I'll help you. Just put away the oil. Thornton's smile was triumphant. I knew you'd see reason. But first I need to understand. If you wanted the ranch so badly, why sabotage it? Why not just offer more money? Because the Stones are stubborn, proud. They've refused every offer, no matter how generous. Thornton pocketed the oil. But pride crumbles in the face of disaster. A man who can't feed his cattle or fight fires or keep his workers safe, that man will sell for pennies on the dollar just to escape his failures. And you destroy their lives for profit. I'd seize an opportunity. That's business, Miss Campbell. Thornton moved closer. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to write a note to Jimmy telling him to meet you in the barn. When he arrives, I'll be waiting. We'll have a conversation about his future and the future of this ranch. You'll threaten him. I'll motivate him. There's a difference. Thornton gestured to the table. Write the note, now. Rose's mind raced. If she wrote the note, Jimmy would walk into a trap. But if she refused, Thornton might hurt her, might burn the kitchen, might do any number of terrible things. She needed time, needed to stall until someone returned. I'll write it, Rose said. But my hands are shaking. I need a moment to calm down. You have 30 seconds. Rose moved to the table, her back to Thornton, and picked up the pencil she kept for writing shopping lists. Her eyes fell on the pot of coffee on the stove. Still hot, nearly boiling, 30 seconds. She counted them in her head. 25. 20. Time's up, Thornton said. Right. Rose spun and threw the coffee pot. It wasn't graceful or well-aimed, but it didn't need to be. The pot hit Thornton in the chest, and boiling coffee splashed across his face and neck. He screamed, stumbling backward, his hands going to his burned skin. Rose ran. She made it to the door, through the bolt, got it open. Cold air hit her face as she burst outside, running through the snow, screaming for help. Fire! Help! Fire! It was the one word guaranteed to bring every man running. Behind her, she heard Thornton cursing, heard him stumble out of the kitchen, but she didn't look back. She ran toward the well where the men were working, her lungs burning, her legs pumping. She saw Hank's head snap up, saw him start running toward her, saw other men dropping their tools and racing in her direction. Thornton! Rose gasped as Hank reached her. Marcus Thornton, he's here. He confessed. He's the one. Slow down, Hank said, gripping her shoulders. Who's here? Thornton, in the kitchen. He broke in. He threatened me. He's going to... A gunshot cracked through the air. Everyone froze. Rose turned to see Thornton standing outside the kitchen, a pistol in his hand, his face red and blistered from the coffee. Nobody move! He shouted. His voice was ragged with pain and fury. The next person who takes a step dies. The men stood motionless. Rose could see Carson's hand moving slowly toward his own gun, but Hank shook his head minutely. Too risky. You ruined everything, Thornton screamed at Rose. You were supposed to help me. You were supposed to be smart. I am smart, Rose called back. Smart enough not to help a monster. Thornton's face twisted with rage. He raised the gun, pointing it directly at Rose. Time seemed to slow. Rose saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw Hank move, trying to push her aside, saw Carson draw his gun, too far away to help. Then she saw Jimmy. He came from the side, riding hard, his horse's hooves throwing up snow. He must have heard the commotion, must have ridden back at full speed. He was shouting something Rose couldn't hear over the blood pounding in her ears. Thornton swung the gun toward Jimmy. No! Rose screamed. Two shots rang out simultaneously, Thornton's wild firing as Carson's bullet hit him in the shoulder. Thornton went down, his gun flying from his hand. Jimmy's horse reared, and for one terrible moment, Rose thought he'd been hit, but he hadn't. He dismounted in one fluid motion and ran to Rose, pulling her into his arms. Are you hurt? His hands were all over her, checking for wounds. Rose, talk to me. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Rose was shaking so hard she could barely stand. I'm fine. He didn't. I threw coffee at him and ran. You threw coffee at him. Jimmy laughed, a sound caught between relief and hysteria. God, Rose, you could have been killed. But I wasn't. We weren't. Rose pulled back to look at his face. It's over. Thornton confessed everything, the fire, the well, all of it. We have him. Hank and several other men had surrounded Thornton, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and moaning. Carson had retrieved the gun and was checking to make sure it was empty. Someone ride to town, Hank ordered. Get the sheriff. Tell him we got the man who's been sabotaging the ranch. As one of the hands galloped away, Jimmy turned Rose's face toward his. When I heard that gunshot, when I thought... His voice broke. Rose, I can't lose you. I just found you. You're not going to lose me. Rose touched his face, smoothing away the fear she saw there. I'm not going anywhere. Jimmy kissed her then, in front of everyone, a kiss full of relief and promise and love. The men cheered, some whistled, and Rose heard Hank's gruff chuckle. When they pulled apart, Rose saw Danny grinning like a fool, saw Carson nodding with approval, saw the other men smiling. This was her family now, these rough, loyal men who'd defended her, believed in her, stood by her. This was home. Ethan's going to be furious he missed this, Jimmy said, his arm tight around Rose's waist. Ethan's going to be relieved it's over, Rose corrected. She looked at the kitchen, at the broken window and the chaos visible through it. And then he's going to be annoyed that I ruined his kitchen. Jimmy laughed. Our kitchen? This is your home now, Rose, if you want it. Rose thought about the long road that had brought her here, the blizzard, the desperation, the fear of being sent away. She thought about the fire and the accusations, about Ethan's slow journey toward trust, about finding love in the most unexpected place. I want it, she said. I want all of it. The ranch, the work, the family. She looked up at Jimmy. I want you. Then you've got me. Jimmy's smile was brilliant. For as long as you'll have me. In the distance, Rose could hear horses approaching. The sheriff, most likely, coming to take Thornton away. Soon Ethan would return from Helena, and they'd have to explain everything. There would be questions and statements and the long process of justice. But right now, in this moment, Rose let herself simply be happy. Let herself believe that the worst was over, that safety and love and home were finally within reach. She'd survived the blizzard, survived the accusations, survived a madman with a gun, and a plan to destroy everything she'd come to care about. She'd more than survived. She'd won. And standing here in Jimmy's arms, surrounded by the men who'd become her family, Rose Campbell finally understood what it meant to belong. The sheriff arrived within the hour, a grizzled man named Wade Patterson, who'd known the Stone family for 20 years. He listened to Rose's account with a grim expression, then to the testimony of Hank and the other men who'd witnessed Thornton's confession and his attempt to shoot Rose. By the time he'd finished taking statements, Thornton had been bandaged, handcuffed, and loaded into a wagon for the journey to town. He'll hang for this, Sheriff Patterson said, settling his hat back on his head. Arson, attempted murder, destruction of property. Judge won't take kindly to a man trying to terrorize honest folk. Rose stood beside Jimmy, watching as the wagon pulled away. Thornton's face was a mask of pain and fury, his burned skin already blistering. He'd tried to speak several times, to threaten or bargain, but the sheriff had silenced him with a sharp word. Now he sat in defeated silence. His grand plan crumbled to dust. Strange thing, Sheriff Patterson said, turning to Rose. Man like Thornton, he's got money and influence. Could have bought a dozen other parcels of land for his railroad scheme. Why fixate on this one? Rose had wondered the same thing. He said it was about the railroad, about the land being worth a fortune. Maybe. Or maybe it was about something else. The sheriff's eyes were shrewd. Men like Thornton, they don't just want what they can't have. They need to win, to prove they're smarter, stronger, better than everyone else. Could be he chose this ranch because the Stones kept saying no, turned it into a personal challenge. Jimmy's arm tightened around Rose's waist. Whatever his reasons, he failed. The ranch is safe. For now, the sheriff agreed. But you folks should know, Thornton's got friends in Helena, rich friends. They might not take kindly to one of their own being arrested on the word of a cook and some ranch hands. Rose felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. You think they'll try to get him released? I think they'll try. Whether they succeed depends on the evidence and the judge. Sheriff Patterson tipped his hat. I'll do what I can to make sure justice is served. You have my word on that. As the sheriff rode away, Rose turned to find the ranch hands watching her with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. Danny stepped forward first. Miss Campbell, that was the bravest thing I ever seen, throwing hot coffee at an armed man. It was the only thing I could think of, Rose admitted. I'm not sure brave is the word. Desperate, maybe. Desperate or not, you saved yourself and probably saved all of us, Hank said. If Thornton had gotten his way, if he'd forced Jimmy into that barn for some kind of trap, no telling how many might have been hurt. Carson nodded his agreement. You did good, Miss Campbell. Real good. The praise felt strange. Rose had spent so long being blamed for things she hadn't done, being viewed with suspicion and mistrust. Having these hard men look at her with respect and gratitude made her throat tight with emotion. Thank you, she managed. All of you, for believing in me when you had every reason not to. You earned that belief, Hank said simply. Now, speaking practically, we got a mess to clean up. Kitchen's got a broken window, well's still contaminated, and we got a whole day's work ahead of us. The men dispersed to their tasks, but Jimmy stayed beside Rose. He was quiet, his jaw tight, and Rose could feel the tension radiating from him. "What's wrong?" she asked. "What's wrong?" Jimmy's voice was strained. "Rose, you could have died. If Thornton had shot you before Carson got him, if you'd slipped in the snow while running, if any of a dozen things had gone differently, but they didn't. I'm here. I'm safe. This time. But what about next time? What about when another threat comes along, another person who wants to hurt this ranch or this family?" Jimmy turned to face her fully. "I can't lose you, Rose. I can't go through that fear again." Rose understood. She'd seen the same fear in Ethan's eyes when he talked about Catherine, about the fire that had nearly killed Jimmy 3 years ago. Fear of loss could paralyze a person, could make them build walls so high that no one could reach them. "You can't live in fear of what might happen," Rose said gently. "That's not living at all. That's just existing, waiting for the next disaster." Easy to say when you're not the one who nearly watched the woman he loves get shot. The words hung in the air between them. The woman he loves. Rose's heart stuttered, then raced. "Jimmy, I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other a handful of days. But when I thought I might lose you, when I saw that gun pointed at you..." Jimmy's hands came up to cup her face. "I realized I don't care about too soon or too fast or what's sensible. I love you, Rose Campbell, and I think I started loving you the moment you walked into that kitchen covered in snow and demanded to prove yourself." Tears pricked Rose's eyes. "I was a mess. I probably smelled like fear and desperation." "You smelled like hope," Jimmy corrected. "Like possibility. Like everything I'd been missing without knowing it." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you feel it too." Rose thought about all the reasons she should be cautious. Her past, her failures, the way her marriage to Thomas had taught her that love without respect was worthless. But looking into Jimmy's winter blue eyes, seeing the honesty and vulnerability there, she couldn't lie. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it was too fast, too risky, but yes, Jimmy, I love you too." Jimmy's kiss was tender, reverent, full of promise. Rose melted into it, letting herself believe that maybe this time love would be enough. That this time she'd found a man who saw her worth, who valued her strength instead of trying to diminish it. They were still kissing when they heard a horse approaching at speed. They broke apart to see Ethan riding hard toward the ranch, his face dark with worry and anger. "That's going to be interesting," Jimmy murmured. Ethan dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward them with purpose. "Someone better explain to me why I just passed the sheriff's wagon with Marcus Thornton in chains, and why my kitchen has a broken window." Rose stepped forward. "Mr. Stone, I can explain..." "I'm sure you can. Inside, now." Ethan's voice brooked no argument. They followed him into the main house, a building Rose had never entered before. It was handsome in a rough, masculine way. Dark wood furniture, worn rugs, a massive fireplace dominating one wall. Ethan gestured for them to sit, but he remained standing, too agitated to settle. "Talk," he ordered. So Rose talked. She told him about Thornton's arrival, about his confession, about the threats and the gun. She told him about throwing the coffee and running, about the shot, and Carson's quick response. She left nothing out, even the parts that made her look reckless or foolish. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he walked to the window, staring out at the ranch. "You threw coffee at him," he said finally. "Yes, sir." "An armed man, a dangerous man. And you threw coffee at him. It seemed like a good idea at the time." Ethan turned, and to Rose's surprise, he was almost smiling. Catherine would have screamed and fainted, or tried to bargain for her own safety. She wouldn't have fought. It was the first time he'd mentioned Catherine's name without bitterness. The first time he'd compared Rose to her without finding Rose wanting. "I'm not Catherine," Rose said quietly. "No, you're not." Ethan moved to the chair across from them and sat heavily. "I went to Helena planning to confront Thornton, to rattle him and see what fell loose. Found his house empty, servants all dismissed. His business partner told me Thornton had been acting strange for weeks, obsessed with acquiring this ranch. Said he'd sunk a fortune into some scheme, though the partner didn't know what. The scheme to sabotage us, Jimmy said. Apparently. And when I wasn't home to be intimidated or bargained with, he came here himself, foolish and desperate. Ethan looked at Rose. And he underestimated you. That was his biggest mistake. I got lucky, Rose said. Luck had nothing to do with it. You kept your head, used what you had at hand, and survived. Ethan leaned forward. Miss Campbell, Rose, I owe you an apology. I've treated you with suspicion since the moment you arrived. I questioned your motives, your character, your place here. I was wrong. The apology coming from this proud, guarded man meant more than Rose could express. You were protecting your family. I understand that. Understanding doesn't make it right. I let my past color my judgment. Let my fear of being betrayed again blind me to what was right in front of me. A good woman trying to build a life from nothing. Ethan's expression softened. You've proven yourself 10 times over, Rose. You've earned your place here, not just as our cook, but as part of this family. Rose's eyes filled with tears again. Thank you. That means more than you know. There's more. Ethan glanced at his brother. I've been thinking about what you said, Jimmy, about the ranch, about our future. You were right. We don't need to expand and take on debt. What we need is to strengthen what we have. Build something sustainable and good. Jimmy looked stunned. You're agreeing with me? Don't look so shocked. I can admit when I'm wrong. Ethan's lips quirked. Though I'd appreciate it if you didn't make a habit of being right. Bad for my authority. Jimmy laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. I'll try to be wrong occasionally, just to keep you humble. The brothers smiled at each other, and Rose saw the bond between them strengthening, the trust that had been strained by fear and disagreement knitting back together. Now, Ethan said, his tone becoming businesslike. We have practical matters to address. The kitchen needs repairs, the well needs cleaning, and we need to prepare for winter in earnest. Rose, I'm officially hiring you as ranch cook, with a proper salary and living quarters. That pantry isn't suitable for long-term residents. Where will I stay? Rose asked. There's a small cottage behind the main house. It was built for the previous foreman, but Hank prefers the bunkhouse. It's yours if you want it. Bedroom, sitting room, even a small kitchen of your own, though I expect you'll still do most of your cooking in the main cookhouse. A cottage. Her own space, her own home. Rose could barely believe it. That's too generous. It's practical, and it's what you've earned. Ethan stood. Take the rest of the day to settle in. Tomorrow we'll start repairs and get things back to normal. He left them alone, and Rose turned to Jimmy with wonder in her eyes. A cottage, a real home. With a real future, Jimmy added. He took her hands. Rose, I know we've been through hell these past days. I know everything's been chaos and fear and fighting to survive. But now that's over, now that we can breathe. I want to talk about us, about what comes next. Rose's heart raced. What do you want to come next? I want to court you properly. Take you to dances in town, introduce you to people as the woman I'm proud to be with. I want to give you time to be sure about this, about us, without the pressure of danger or suspicion. Jimmy squeezed her hands. And then, when you're ready, when you're absolutely certain, I want to marry you, Rose Campbell. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. I want to wake up every morning to the smell of your cooking and fall asleep every night with you in my arms. Rose's breath caught. Marriage. A real marriage to a good man who loved her for who she was. It was everything she'd stopped believing she could have. I want that too, she said. All of it. But Jimmy, you should know. I'm broken in some ways. Thomas, he hurt me in ways that don't show. I might flinch when you raise your voice. I might have days where I can't believe this is real, where I wait for it all to fall apart. Then I'll spend every day proving it's real, proving I'm not him, that this love is different. Jimmy pulled her close. We're all broken in some ways, Rose. The question is whether we're willing to heal together. Rose buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and hay and something uniquely Jimmy. Yes, Yes, I'm willing. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of the main house. Then Jimmy pulled back with a smile. Come on, let me show you your cottage. The cottage was small but perfect. Whitewashed walls, a stone fireplace, windows that let in the afternoon light. The bedroom had a real bed with a quilted coverlet. The sitting room had comfortable chairs and a small table. And the kitchen, though tiny, was efficient and well appointed. It's beautiful, Rose breathed, turning in a slow circle. It's yours. Jimmy leaned against the doorframe, watching her with soft eyes. Make it a home, Rose. Our home, eventually, if you'll have me. Rose went to him, rising on her toes to kiss him. I'll have you. Today, tomorrow, for as long as you'll stay. Forever then, because I'm not going anywhere. That evening, Rose cooked dinner in the main kitchen despite Ethan's suggestion to rest. The men needed feeding, and the work soothed her, helped her process everything that had happened. She made a feast, roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes with butter, green beans, fresh bread, and an apple pie using the dried apples from the pantry. The men ate with enthusiasm, their spirits high now that the threat had passed. Danny told and retold the story of Rose throwing coffee at Thornton, embellishing it more with each telling until Rose had to laugh and correct him. I wasn't that brave, she protested. I was terrified. Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's the definition of brave, Carson said. Coming from him, the taciturn cowboy who rarely spoke, it meant everything. After dinner, as Rose was cleaning up, she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw a wagon approaching, and her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the driver. It was Martha Henley from Billings, the woman who'd told Rose about the cook's position. But it was the person sitting beside Martha that made Rose's hands start shaking. A young woman, maybe 18, with dark hair and familiar features. Features Rose hadn't seen in 5 years. Her sister. Her baby sister. Emily. Rose ran outside without thinking, without even removing her apron. She was halfway to the wagon when Emily saw her, and the girl's face transformed with joy and disbelief. Rose! Rose! Emily scrambled down from the wagon and ran toward her sister. They collided in the snow, holding each other and crying. Rose couldn't speak, couldn't think. She just held her sister, the girl who'd been only 13 when the fever took their parents and brother, the girl Rose had sent away to live with their aunt in Denver because she couldn't afford to keep her. How? Rose finally managed. How are you here? Martha found me, Emily said through her tears. She wrote to me in Denver after she realized she'd given you wrong information about the job here. Told me where you were, said you'd made a place for yourself. I had to come. Had to see you. I've been looking for you for years, Rose. Years. I'm so sorry. Rose held her sister's face, seeing the girl she'd been in the young woman she'd become. I'm so sorry I sent you away that I couldn't keep us together. You did what you had to do. I understand that now. Emily's smile was watery but genuine. Aunt Margaret took good care of me, made sure I got educated. But I never stopped missing you, never stopped hoping I'd find you again. Rose turned to see Jimmy approaching, his expression gentle and understanding. Emily, this is Jimmy Stone. Rose hesitated, not sure how to explain. I'm the man who loves your sister, Jimmy said simply, offering his hand to Emily. It's an honor to meet you. Emily shook his hand, studying him with shrewd eyes that reminded Rose of their mother. You better be good to her. She's been through enough. I plan to spend my life proving I'm worthy of her, Jimmy said. Martha Henley had climbed down from the wagon and was explaining to Hank how she'd tracked down Emily through a network of letters and favors. Felt responsible, you see. My mistake brought Rose here under false pretenses. Least I could do was bring her some happiness. You brought her more than that? Rose said, turning to the older woman. You brought me everything. This job, this place, this family, and now my sister. I can never repay you. Don't want repayment. Just want to know you're happy. Martha smiled. Are you, Rose? Are you happy? Rose looked around at the faces surrounding her. Hank, gruff but kind. Carson, taciturn but loyal. Danny and the other hands who'd accepted her without hesitation. Ethan, who'd learned to trust again. Jimmy, who loved her. And Emily, her sister, her family. restored to her after so many years apart. "Yes," Rose said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'm happy." The next weeks passed in a blur of joy and work. Emily stayed in the cottage with Rose, the two sisters talking late into the night, catching up on 5 lost years. Rose learned that Emily had become a teacher in Denver, that she'd been happy with their aunt, but had never stopped missing her older sister. "I wrote to you," Emily said one night as they sat by the fire. "Dozens of letters sent to every address I could think of, but they all came back." "I was moving around," Rose admitted. "After Thomas died, I couldn't stay in one place. The gossip, the judgment, it followed me everywhere." "Tell me about him, about what really happened." So Rose told her. Everything she'd never been able to say to anyone, about Thomas's drinking, his cruelty, his infidelities, about the night he died, about the town blaming her, about the desperate months that followed, about working at the Rose Bell, about the shame and the survival, about the moment she'd decided to walk away from it all and try one more time to build something good. Emily listened without judgment, her hand holding Rose's. When the story was done, she said simply, "You're the strongest person I know." "I don't feel strong. I feel lucky. Lucky that the blizzard led me here. Lucky that Jimmy saw something in me worth defending. Lucky that Thornton's plan failed." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Emily said, echoing Ethan's words. "You made your own path, Rose. You always have." The well was cleaned and refilled, the barn repairs were completed, and the kitchen window was replaced with glass that Ethan had shipped from Helena at considerable expense. The ranch settled into winter routines, and Rose settled into her role not just as cook, but as a valued member of the High Ridge family. Jimmy courted her properly, just as he'd promised. He took her to a dance in town, where she met the townspeople and saw their surprise at the transformation of the woman who'd arrived in a blizzard. He brought her wildflowers that he'd somehow found blooming in a sheltered valley. He read to her from books of poetry in front of the cottage fire, his voice turning the words into music. And slowly, carefully, Rose learned to trust. To believe that this happiness was real, that it wouldn't be snatched away by cruel fate or cruel men. 3 months after Thornton's arrest, word came that he'd been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. His influential friends had tried to intervene, but the evidence was too strong, the crimes too serious. Justice, it seemed, could prevail even against money and power. Rose felt no joy in his downfall, only relief that the threat was truly ended. It was a bright April morning when Jimmy came to the cottage where Rose was teaching Emily to make her famous biscuits. He was dressed in his good clothes, his hair neatly combed, and he held a small box in his hands. "Emily," he said, "would you mind giving us a moment?" Emily looked between them, her eyes dancing with excitement, and quickly excused herself. Jimmy took Rose's flour-dusted hands in his. "I had a whole speech planned. Something poetic about blizzards and second chances and finding light in darkness. But standing here looking at you, covered in flour and more beautiful than any woman has a right to be, I can't remember a word of it." Rose laughed, her heart already racing. "Jimmy, so I'll just say this plain. Rose Campbell, you walked into my life when I needed you most. You brought warmth and hope and love to a place that had grown cold with fear and suspicion. You proved that trust is possible, that love can bloom even in the darkest winter." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Marry me, Rose. Be my wife, my partner, my home. Help me build a future that honors everything you've survived to get here." Rose looked at the ring, then at Jimmy's face, seeing the love and hope and vulnerability there. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the pain and loss, the fear and fighting, the slow blooming of trust and love. She thought about the girl who'd walked into a blizzard with nothing but stubborn hope and a determination to survive. That girl had become a woman who'd found her place, her family, her love. "Yes," Rose said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Jimmy, I'll marry you." Jimmy slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Rose laughed, holding tight to him, feeling the joy bubble up inside her like champagne. When he set her down, they kissed, long and deep and full of promise. Through the window, Rose could see Emily dancing with excitement, could see Hank and some of the hands watching with grins. When? Jimmy asked against her lips. Soon, Rose said. As soon as we can arrange it. I've waited long enough for happiness. I don't want to wait another day. They were married 6 weeks later under the great oak tree on the ranch property, with Emily as maid of honor and Ethan standing up as Jimmy's best man. The whole ranch attended, along with half the town and Martha Henley, who cried through the entire ceremony. Rose wore a simple white dress that Emily had helped her make, and wildflowers in her hair. Jimmy wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the sun and stars and everything in between. Reverend Walsh, who'd known the Stone family for generations, spoke about love and perseverance, about how the strongest marriages were forged in adversity and tempered by trust. His words resonated with everyone present, who knew the story of how Rose and Jimmy had found each other. When it came time for the vows, Jimmy took Rose's hands and spoke from his heart. Rose, you came to me in a blizzard, and you've been my warmth ever since. You've taught me that trust is a choice, that love is an action, that home is wherever you are. I promise to stand by you through every storm, to believe in you when you doubt yourself, to love you with everything I am for all the days of my life. Rose's voice was steady despite her tears. Jimmy, you saw worth in me when I'd forgotten my own value. You defended me when others doubted, loved me when I thought myself unlovable. I promise to build a life with you built on honesty and respect, to stand beside you as your partner and equal, to love you fiercely and faithfully until my last breath. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Jimmy kissed his bride as the ranch hands whistled and clapped, as Emily cried happy tears, as Ethan smiled with genuine warmth. The celebration lasted well into the night. Rose had prepared a feast with Emily's help, all her signature dishes and some new ones she'd been perfecting. The men ate and drank and danced at their joy infectious. At one point, Hank pulled Rose aside. Never thought I'd see the day, he said, his gruff voice suspiciously thick. This ranch, it's been full of sadness for too long, but you brought life back to it, brought joy. Thank you for that, Mrs. Stone. Mrs. Stone. Rose tried out the name in her mind and found she loved it. Not because it erased who she'd been, but because it acknowledged who she'd become. As the stars came out and the celebration continued, Jimmy led Rose away from the crowd to a quiet spot beneath the oak tree where they'd just been married. Happy? He asked, pulling her close. Happier than I ever thought possible, Rose admitted. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this was all a dream. Then I'll spend every day making sure you know it's real. Jimmy kissed her forehead. We've got our whole lives ahead of us, Rose. What do you want to do with them? Rose thought about it. I want to keep cooking for the ranch, keep making this place feel like home. I want to help Emily get established, maybe help her open a school in town. And someday when we're ready, I want children, a family of our own. That sounds perfect. Jimmy's arms tightened around her. You know what the best part is? We get to build it together. Every decision, every dream, every challenge, we face it as partners. Partners, Rose repeated, loving the word. Equal partners. Always. They stood there under the stars, holding each other, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting from the ranch. Rose thought about the long road that had brought her here, about every hardship that had shaped her, every loss that had strengthened her. She thought about the girl who'd walked 6 hours through a blizzard, desperate and afraid but refusing to give up. That girl had found more than a job or a home. She'd found herself. She'd found her worth. She'd found love that didn't demand she diminish herself, but celebrated everything she was. The months that followed the wedding brought their own challenges and joys. Rose and Jimmy moved into the cottage together, making it truly their home. Emily decided to stay in Montana, opening a small school in town with financial backing from Ethan, who'd recognized her talent and dedication. Rose continued to cook for the ranch, but now with Emily's help on busy days. The sisters worked side by side, teaching each other, learning from each other, building the relationship they'd lost too soon and found again against all odds. The ranch prospered under Ethan and Jimmy's joint leadership, their different perspectives balancing each other. They bought no new land, took on no debt, but strengthened what they had. The men were loyal and hardworking. The cattle thrived, and High Ridge Ranch became known throughout Montana as a place of integrity and quality. And Rose became known as more than just the cook. She became the heart of the ranch, the one who made it a home rather than just a workplace. Cowboys who'd been planning to move on stayed because of her cooking and her kindness. New hands were told that if they wanted to work at High Ridge, they'd better be respectful and hardworking, because Mrs. Stone didn't tolerate nonsense. On a crisp October morning, nearly a year after her arrival, Rose stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she felt Jimmy's arms wrap around her from behind. "Good morning, Mrs. Stone," he murmured against her neck. "Good morning, Mr. Stone." Rose leaned back against him, savoring the moment. "Sleep well?" "Perfectly, though I woke up to an empty bed and followed the smell of coffee." He turned her in his arms. "You're up early." "I have something to tell you." Rose's heart was racing, but with joy this time, not fear. "Something I've been waiting to be sure about before I said anything." Jimmy's expression grew concerned. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right." Rose took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Jimmy. You're going to be a father." For a moment, Jimmy just stared at her, his expression stunned. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise, brilliant and beautiful. He laughed, picked her up and spun her around just as he had when she'd accepted his proposal. "A baby," he said, setting her down gently, his hands immediately going to her stomach as if he could feel the tiny life growing there. "Rose, a baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" Rose asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Jimmy's eyes were wet. "You've given me so much already. Love, partnership, home, and now this. A child. A family." He kissed her softly. "When?" "Late spring, I think. April or May. A spring baby. New life in the season of new beginnings." Jimmy pulled her close, careful now of the precious cargo she carried. "Have you told Emily?" "Not yet. I wanted you to be the first to know." "Let's tell her together, and Ethan, and—" Jimmy laughed. "Hell, let's tell everyone. I want to shout it from the rooftops." They told Emily over breakfast, and she cried and hugged them both, already planning how she'd be the best aunt any child ever had. They told Ethan, who looked shocked and then quietly pleased, already talking about adding rooms to the cottage for a nursery. By lunchtime, the whole ranch knew. The men congratulated Jimmy with backslapping and ribbing, and they treated Rose with even more care than before, as if she might break. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Rose protested when Danny tried to take a pot from her hands. "I can still work." "Course you can," Hank said. "But humor us, Mrs. Stone. Let us help. It's all we know how to do." So Rose let them help, let them show their care through action, and she continued to cook, to nurture, to build the life she'd once thought was impossible. Winter came again, but this time Rose faced it without fear. She had a warm home, a loving husband, family and friends surrounding her. She had purpose and security and love that grew deeper every day. She also had her mother's cookbook, which she'd saved from the fire all those months ago. She spent winter evenings reading it, learning recipes she'd forgotten, planning meals for her child to grow up eating. One snowy evening, as Rose sat by the fire with the cookbook in her lap and Jimmy's hand resting on her growing belly, he asked, "Do you ever think about that day you arrived? About walking through the blizzard?" "Sometimes," Rose admitted. "I think about how desperate I was, how afraid. How I walked 6 hours through snow with holes in my boots, not knowing if I'd find anything at the end." "What would you tell that woman now if you could go back and talk to her?" Rose thought about it. "I'd tell her to keep walking, that every step through that storm is leading her home, that she's stronger than she knows, braver than she believes, and worthy of everything good that's coming." She looked up at Jimmy. "I'd tell her that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations." "And the man she'd meet at the end was pretty handsome too," Jimmy added with a grin. Rose laughed and swatted his arm. "Modest as always." "Just stating facts." Jimmy's expression grew serious. "Rose, do you have any regrets? About how things happened? About the path that led you here?" Rose considered the question honestly. She thought about Thomas and the pain he'd caused, about the rose bell and the shame, about the desperation and fear that had driven her through that blizzard. She thought about every hardship, every loss, every moment she'd thought she couldn't go on. "No," she said finally. "No regrets. Because every hard thing, every loss, every moment of pain, it shaped me into someone strong enough to accept this happiness, someone brave enough to fight for it. If I could erase the hard parts, I might also erase the growth, the strength, the wisdom they gave me." "You're remarkable," Jimmy said softly. "I'm just someone who refused to give up, who kept walking through the storm until I found home." As spring approached and Rose's belly grew round with their child, preparations began in earnest. The cottage was expanded, a nursery added with a cradle that Carson had built with his own hands. Emily sewed tiny clothes, her face soft with anticipation of being an aunt. The ranch hands argued good-naturedly about whether the baby would be a boy or girl, taking informal bets and making outrageous predictions. Ethan surprised everyone by being the most excited of all. He'd never shown much interest in children before, but the idea of being an uncle seemed to unlock something in him. He ordered books on child-rearing from back east, much to Jimmy's amusement. "You planning to raise my child for me?" Jimmy teased. "Someone needs to make sure you don't mess it up," Ethan shot back, but his smile took the sting from the words. On a warm April morning, when the wildflowers were blooming in the valley and the oak tree was budding with new leaves, Rose felt the first pains of labor. Jimmy, who'd been calm through every crisis the ranch had faced, panicked completely. He ran for the doctor, then ran back to Rose, then ran for Emily, all while Rose sat calmly in the kitchen chair, breathing through the contractions. "Jimmy," she said when he burst through the door for the third time, "I'm fine. The baby's not coming for hours yet. Breathe." "I am breathing," Jimmy said, though he looked like he might faint. "Then breathe slower. You're turning blue." Emily arrived with the doctor, a capable woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd settled in town the year before. She examined Rose, pronounced everything normal, and settled in to wait. The labor lasted through the day and into the evening. Rose bore it with the same quiet strength she'd shown through every trial, focusing, breathing, enduring. Jimmy stayed by her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the partner he'd promised to be. Just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Rose gave one final push and brought new life into the world. "A girl," Dr. Chen announced, placing the squalling infant on Rose's chest. A healthy, beautiful girl. Rose looked down at her daughter, red-faced and angry, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would surely be blue like her father's, and felt love so fierce it stole her breath. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome home." Jimmy was crying openly, his hand trembling as he touched his daughter's tiny fist. "She's perfect. Rose, she's perfect." "What will you name her?" Dr. Chen asked. Rose and Jimmy had discussed this